prosecutors to that aspect. So this was my first year being able to come on board and do the Oscoda Township audit. So it's always nice every once in a while to get a fresh set of eyes. So I'm going to assume, since I don't know most of you very well, I'm going to assume or pretend that it's the first time you've ever gone through a report, and I'm going to talk through the big changes, the things that are important to point out. I'm not going to go page by page. That would absolutely bore you. But if you do have questions, please let me know. I want to make sure that, especially for the board, that all of your questions are answered. And my contact information is at the back of the presentation as well. So if you have any other questions and you want to reach out to me personally, one-on-one, please email me, call me. I always want you to feel like you're able to do that, even throughout the year, because sometimes something's going to come up in the middle of the year, and it's a lot better to address it head on then.
Wonder what happened to Jamie Carruthers.
Who is that?
Paisley's rustling papers.
Okay, I think I know which one that was. All right, go ahead. Please continue.
Okay. So, Aaron, are you the one running the presentation slides?
Yep.
Okay. Will you go down one for me? So what we have here for the audit report layout, think of this as like a table of contents. So if you have your audit report in front of you, that bound copy, this is basically what your table of contents would look like. We're going to go through each one of these in the presentation. So with the next slide, I talk about the audit opinion letter. The next slide, Aaron. So that is the most important part of everything we do. When we issue an audit report, we come out and do an audit. We're there for a couple weeks. We're working very hard to test everything and tie things out. And yes, you contract with us to prepare the financial statements, but what our audit opinion is doing is we're saying, is this information accurate and free of material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error? And we were able to issue an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance. So we're able to say, yes, this is accurate information that you can rely on. So we're not saying if the township is in good financial standing or poor financial standing, but is it solid, accurate information that you can rely on? And yes, it is. So then the next slide. Next, beginning on page 3 of your audit report, is the management's discussion and analysis. I really encourage you to read through this page by page, line by line. It recaps the year in layman's terms, and it's a lot easier to follow and to read through. So it's a good big picture view of what happened throughout the year. So I do encourage you to read that later. So then the government-wide financial statements. Your financial statements are made up of 2 different sets of financial data. The first, what you're more familiar with, are called the fund statements, and we're going to talk about those in detail in a few minutes. But your fund statements are what you budget in accordance with. It's what your trial balance is in line with. And it takes each of the individual funds of the township and it records them separately. Well, what the government-wide statements do is it takes all of those funds and combines them into one set of financial data. So you have one big picture view of how the township's doing, but then it incorporates your long-term activity. So your bonds, your land, your building, your equipment, your net pension liabilities, and it incorporates all that long-term activity that you don't have in the fund statements. And it gives you almost like a big picture net worth of the township. So we're going to talk a few minutes about the big picture view, everything all together, and then we'll break it down into the funds. So a couple things to point out on this slide is that because the government-wide statements incorporate that long-term activity and your governmental funds like the general fund do not, this is the only place that you're going to see that net pension liability outside of your enterprise funds like the water and the sewer. So your general fund doesn't have that pension liability, but the government-wide does. And at year end, your net pension liability was $1,691,867. To give you a big picture view of what the net pension liability is, in case you're not aware, GASB 68 came into effect a few years back, and it said, what is the liability that the township owes for all current and past employees from the time of retirement to the time of death? So an actuary at the state level has to do a huge valuation to come up with that estimate, and it is an estimate. That number can change drastically from year to year based on the assumptions that the actuaries make. Unfortunately, you have no control over that number. I have no control over that number. The state issues the valuation report from MERS, and it tells right in that report, here's what your liability is that you have to record in the financial statements. Now, many governments across the state are in the red on their government-wide statements because that net pension liability is so huge. You are not. You are still in the black. Your primary government ending net position is over 15 million. So that's really exciting to see. That shows big picture view that the township was prepared for such a huge hit to the liability. Next slide. So some big changes from 2018, and again, I'm looking at the big picture view, everything combined, and there's just a handful of really big things you've got going on. One, the dissolution of the DDA. So in April of 2019, the DDA was dissolved. And what this meant then was that not only did the cash that was sitting in the DDA bank account have to get transferred to the appropriate places, which we'll talk about in a second, but also the fixed assets that were owned by the DDA had to get transferred to the township. So you're going to see when we get into the general fund that there was a huge inflow of, we call it a special item, of the DDA donating, essentially contributing those fixed assets to the township. So you're going to see that revenue come in, but then you're also going to show an expense on the capital outlay side to show that it became a fixed asset to the township. So that increased the governmental activities of the township and then reduced the component unit, which is the DDA. For the cash that was being held, what had to happen was there were two separate funds, and for Fund 248, that had to get allocated between the township and the other governments where those dollars had been recaptured from. And then in Fund 252, it all came back to the township. So I have the dollar amounts there so you can see what went where.
And Cindy, just so everybody's crystal clear, that 11,549 was booked to 2019 already as a liability.
Yes.
And so those refund checks can be cut because it's already a liability booked back to 2019.
That is correct.
Okay.
This because the dissolution happened in April of 19, all of this activity was recorded in your 2019 financial statements.
Okay.
Next slide. So other big changes, your cash increased overall about $560,000, and there's a lot of different components coming into this, part of it being the dissolution of the DDA, part of it being the sale and closure of the community center, a lot of different factors in here, and we'll talk about the specifics in a minute. Your due from federal government and accounts payable both decreased related to the Phase 1 water main project that was going on at the end of 18 that carried into 19. You have an investment in the Iosco exploration trail of $145,000. And so it's our understanding that that will become a fixed asset once it's complete, but in the meantime, it's considered an investment on your books. And then your net pension liability, remember we just talked about this as being a big assumption, that decreased $116,538. Now, here's kind of the kicker. The governments that I audit that have June year ends, they all realized a huge increase in that net pension liability because the measurement date for their valuations was December of 18. And December of 18, the market was down for governments. So when the market is down, the actuaries assume a lower return on investment. So your liability goes up. Your actuarial valuation is as of December 31st, 2019, when the stock market was high. So your liability was lower because the actuaries were assuming a much higher rate of return. Time will tell, but I very much anticipate seeing your liability go back up next year, because I think it's a pretty fair assumption that the stock markets and the investment returns are going to be lower at December 31st, 2020 than they were 19. So this is an estimate. I can't stress enough that you just have to take this as informative, know that it's disclosure and information for your taxpayers and your users, but this will fluctuate drastically from year to year. And then your long-term debt decreased $440,000 due to current year principal payments. On the capital asset side, there's a lot going on. I'm not going to read every single one. You have all the information there of what the additions were, but the largest two were the DDA assets coming into the township, and then the water main extension project being considered construction in progress, but being capitalized during the year. Disposal side, there were a lot of vehicles and other items disposed of, but the big one would be the community center for $300,914 of a loss. And then there was an impairment loss on the Artisan Hall recorded of $117,484. And what that means is that we have to, when you're not utilizing a fixed asset for its intended original purpose, we have to evaluate the carrying value. What are you carrying this asset as on your books? What value does it have on your books? And we have to compare that to what is it worth for the purpose in which you're using it. So when we did that, what you were carrying it for was $117,484 higher than what it is worth. So we recorded that loss and that expense to get it back down to a level playing field. And that way, when the building is sold or repurposed or however, whatever happens with that building, the loss will be more accurate compared to what the value should have been. Next slide. On the sewer expenditures, they're down, mostly related to the SAW grant ending in the prior year. Your water expenses are up, mostly related to Huron Shores fees increasing roughly $100,000 last year. Water grant revenue is down because of that phase 1 project mostly being completed in the prior year. And then your shared services with the Oscoda Township did increase, so that increased your revenue from shared services $105,000. You have 2 new millages out there, the police operating millage and the staffing millage, and so you have new revenues related to those. And then, as I mentioned before, the big special items that we actually show on your financial statement separately to draw attention to them and to not skew the operating activity was the contributed assets of the DDA and the impairment of the Artisan Hall. Do you want me to see if there's any questions, Aaron, before I go into the fund statements? Or just keep going? Okay.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. Do what you're going to do.
All right, next slide. So for the fund statements, as I mentioned before, this excludes that long-term activity, and it dials in onto what you're used to looking at, what you're used to budgeting in accordance with. And there are a lot of changes going on the fund side of things. This year in 2019's financials, we had to implement GASB standard number 84. And this was quite the hefty GASB to implement. It required us going through all of the different fiduciary funds that you have and ensuring that they're being recorded the way that the new law requires, which required creating new funds. We have some funds that were eliminated through this whole process, and additional financial statements included in the report. So it's a pretty hefty change. And just a couple of them to point out to you real quick. You now have a drug fines and forfeitures fund, a special revenue fund that you did not previously have. It's not new dollars, but they were previously being shown in the fiduciary funds. We're now under GASB 84 have to be a separate special revenue fund. The community center closed, so that fund is gone. The CDBG fund closed, so that is gone. And let's see, you have the new police fund, operating fund, the police staffing fund with those millages. And then we did some research and some testing to go back to your property operations and maintenance fund. Previously, all of those dollars were shown as restricted, and we were able to support that they should not be shown as restricted, but should actually be shown as committed, because the restricted purpose for those original dollars was already spent in previous years. The dollars that are now sitting in the fund had come in through rental income, which is not restricted. So your major funds, the definition of a major fund for fund financial statements is when a given classification, such as assets, liabilities, revenues, or expenditures, exceed 5% of the government's entire asset or entire liability. So your major funds for the governmental funds is the general fund, the property operations and maintenance fund, and the police fund. All the other funds are in the back of the financial statements combined. For the enterprise funds, your major funds are the sewage disposal system fund, the water fund, Old Orchard Park fund, and the health and community center fund. Remember, it's closing for next year, but we still had to show the activity this year to close it out. Next slide. So ending fund balances. When I look at your general fund, you ended at about $2.3 million, which was an increase of about $500,000. So things affecting this. You got the DDA closing and transferring dollars over. You've got the community center selling, closing, with those remaining dollars in the fund getting transferred to the general fund. But then you also have the new police fund where you did reduce your expenditures, but you also increased your transfers to transfer it over to the new fund. So lots going on in that general fund this year. The property operations and maintenance fund that I just mentioned, $2.8 million, not a large fluctuation from last year. It was only a decrease of a little over $1,000, but 100% committed now. For the police fund, $198,471 is what remains in that fund. And that is a new fund, so that's a 100% increase. And with all of your other funds, it's just over $1 million, an increase overall of $173,608. So if we look at your general fund, just the general fund, I have for you here the last 3 years of general fund balances at year end, and you can see that you stayed pretty consistent from 17 to 18, and now in 19 it's jumped up there. So let's go on to the next slide. Big picture view, I don't need to spend a lot of time here. With sewage, water, and Old Orchard Park, they all increased. But a big portion of what you have in each of those fund balances, or net positions as it's called here, is fixed assets. So when you have a portion of your investment sitting set aside as land, building, and equipment, which with enterprise funds you have to record, I like to point that out to you. So for example, with the sewage disposal system, of the $2.8 million, $1.4 million of that is fixed assets. So it's not liquid dollars that you can go spend in the budget, but it's good to understand that. Let's look at the next slide. We're going to go, Health and Community Center, you can see it ended at 0, and then all your other non-major enterprise funds, Bennett and Campground, that one closed as well, those are at 0. So next year's financials will be a little bit thinner, not much, but a little bit thinner because those will go away. Next slide, general fund revenues. I'd like to give you a visual of how your revenues are derived. What's making them up? So these are the categories that I find beneficial. Property taxes, special assessments, federal grants, state grants, charges for services, fines and forfeitures, other revenue, and then special items. You can see property taxes, special assessments, federal grants. I mean, not a lot of fluctuation there. On the state grant side, back in 2017, you had a state grant related to the Oscoda Beach Park. That was pre-me coming on, but that's what I understand was the reason for such a high amount in 17 was a one-time grant there. The charges for services increasing this year was directly related to your shared services with the Township increasing. The other revenue and financing sources is directly related to the community center closing and transferring over those proceeds. And then the special item is the DDA dissolving and transferring over those assets. So then in the next slide, you can see just the big picture view, just for 2019, 35% of your revenue is taxes. So it shows you how much you rely on your taxes. Now these numbers are a little skewed because you've got that special item that wouldn't normally be there. So your property taxes would be even higher than 35%. Your other financing sources and revenue would normally be lower because you're not going to sell a community center every year. So they are a little skewed, but it still gives you the big picture view of just how important your property taxes are to the township. The next slide. For general fund expenditures, I'm doing the same concept here, but I'm not going to focus energy on this slide. We're going to focus on one in a minute. But initially, when I was looking at your expenditures in the general fund, they're all over the board. There's such huge fluctuations, but it's because those police activities were pulled out to the separate funds. So if you go to the next slide, what I thought would be more beneficial to you is if I combine the general fund and the police fund expenses to show you how payroll actually changed, purchase services changed, repairs and maintenance, and you can see it's all very, very minimal in your changes. Capital outlay, you've got the big hike, and that, again, related to the DDA dissolution, we have to show, when we show the contribution from the DDA, we got to show the capital outlay expenses to offset it. Supplies went up just a little bit. Operating transfers, pretty consistent there. And I did remove out of here for the transfers. I'm not showing the ins or the outs related to the general fund to the police transfer fund. So next slide, just like with the revenue, I wanted to show you that big picture view of where your expenses are, but this is very skewed without having the police activity. So if we jump down one more slide, you'll see the general fund and the police fund, and you'll see that your payroll costs are about 50%. With the capital outlay in there, it's skewed. So if we were to pull that out, you'd probably be closer to 60%, which is pretty much in line with what I see a lot of townships at. Any questions on the fund statements before I jump into the notes? Okay, next slide. With the notes to the financial statements, those begin on page 24. It's a lot of really good information about policies of the township and where things were at and how things were handled. I only want to point out a few important ones. On page 34, we talk about items of the dissolution of the DDA and the impairment of the Artisan Hall. It's important to the users to know what big things happened and what triggered it. So those are discussed on page 34. Also on page 34, we discussed the 2 new GASB standards that had to be implemented this year. GASB statement number 88, which was disclosures related to your debt. We had to go back through, read all your debt covenants, read the agreements, and then change the footnotes to incorporate all of the new requirements. And then GASB 84, which is the one I mentioned before, which is the doozy, where we had to go through all the funds, go through definitions of the funds, track activity, and figure out where it needs to be recorded moving in the current year and moving forward, as well as add some additional financial statements.
What I would interject in there so the board understands, within that fiduciary activity, the T&A deposits within there, we had done a lot of work to be able to clear out those T&A deposits. If we hadn't cleared those out, we would have had to be, tracking down a lot more money as far as the T&A deposits,
right,
and creating more to be able to account for those correctly with the implementation of GASB 84.
Yes, GASB 84 was definitely a lot of work for us, a lot of work for your team, but I really think that next year, everyone involved is going to be thrilled with the end result because it's going to be much more smooth, transparent, and user-friendly with the financial statements. Next slide. Idle impaired capital assets. We have to discuss the fact that the Artisan Hall is considered impaired. I know we already talked about in the special items section, but we also have to report on it as being an idle impaired asset. And then related to GASB, we did have to post some prior period adjustments that we couldn't just flow through the current year. So we have those listed there. In addition, there was an overcharge to the DDA in the prior year that we found during the current year audit, just because of the fact that thresholds and how we test changed. I was able to uncover that this year, where last year it didn't meet the requirements to fall into what we would have found. It was below the materiality threshold. This year, because we went from a large number to 0, it jumped out at me. So we had to post a prior period adjustment to correct that, to reduce the beginning general fund balance and increase the beginning DDA fund. Next slide. Subsequent events and then commitments. The difference between the two here, and these are on pages 50 and 51, is that when the board approves something prior to the end of the year, so prior to December 31st, that is not complete, that's considered a commitment, and we are required to disclose that to the user. So you can see the list of commitments on the bottom section. Then when the board approves something after the end of the year, so January's meeting, they approve the purchase of something, even though it's after year end and it's not related to the year we're auditing, we are aware of it before we issue our report. So anything that's significant that's approved after year end, before the date of the audit report, we then have to include that information as well. So you can see those listed. Next slide. So page 52, I think this is just a neat, informative page, but it is required. This relates to your net pension liability. So what this is telling you is that as of December 31st, 2019, 62% of your overall liability, so the total amount that they anticipate you having to pay for all current and past employees from retirement to death, the total amount you'd have to pay, how much of that is currently set aside in MERS as an asset in a trust account? 62% of it. So you were 62% funded at the end of the year. Last year, you were 58% funded. I very much anticipate it's going to be much lower next year, but we'll have to see. Then we're required to disclose, where did you originally budget yourselves to be? Where did you end the year with your budget? And then what did you actually do, and what's that variation? So rule of thumb is to try to be within 5%. If it's more than 5%, the state automatically will generate a letter, which Dave has already experienced, that says, hey, your budget is more than 5% off. What happened? So what happened here, and this was a complete isolated incident, but what happened here was that whole situation with the DDA, where the DDA donated those assets. So technically then the township needed to record a revenue in their budget and an expense in their budget for that activity. But that wasn't considered, which I completely understand why. It's just not something that happens all the time. So just because of the page in your audit report that shows that variance being at 10%, the state automatically generates a letter out to the township to report to them what happened and how are you going to fix it. It's as simple as telling them the DDA dissolved and we acquired their assets and didn't account for the revenue and the expense, but the net change to our fund balance was 0. And that will be completely acceptable by the state.
And so that is later on in the agenda. We have an action item associated with that with very similar terms.
Okay, great. Next slide. So on page 57, it begins the combining statement. So if you remember at the beginning, I told you all of your funds that don't meet the definition of a major fund get combined in the back. So starting on page 57, you can see all that activity in those following pages if you want to drill down into more detailed information of a specific fund. Next slide. Then in the very back of the audit report, not bound but loosely enclosed, is the management letter. The management letter has 2 appendices. And the first appendix talk about the responsibilities of under GAAP and governmental accounting standards and uniform guidance. And it talks about the plan, scope, and timing of the audit. Now, all of the board members should have received a letter from me prior to the audit. I always send out letters to my board before the audit begins, so that way you have my contact information, you know how to get a hold of me, because I want you to reach out to me with questions, concerns, things you need me to dig into. So hopefully everybody received it. If you didn't, let me know, and that way I can make sure I update my contact information. And then we talk about in the letter significant audit findings. Findings is a funny term, but it's the required terminology. Again, we have to disclose GASB 88 as being significant changes to this year's audit. And we have to talk about how the net pension liability is a significant estimate. For difficulties encountered, there were no difficulties encountered on behalf of your team not working very hard. The only difficulties were because there were so many factors involved this year that we had to wade through. But I don't know that I'd say difficulties is just, it was a challenge audit this year. Next year will be much more smooth. For corrected and uncorrected misstatements, we're simply disclosing to you that nothing was left uncorrected that's material to the financial statements. There were no disagreements with management. Management did sign a representation letter telling us and confirming for us that they're not withholding information and everything that they provided to us is accurate to the best of their knowledge. We're not aware of you consulting with other auditors trying to get a better opinion. I gave you the highest opinion you can get, so not sure that that would happen anyway. And there are no other issues or matters that we're not going to discuss. So then Appendix 2, next slide. For Appendix 2, this is where we go into our management comments and recommendations. What did we see where we want to make recommendations for improvement? And some of the areas are just things that we'd like to point out to you. Other areas are required for us to disclose. So first I want to define for you the 3 levels of management comments that you're going to see. First, material weakness, which is the highest comment we give. By definition, a material weakness is something that it's a significant component of your audit report. It's reasonably possible for something to go wrong. It doesn't mean anything has, but it's reasonably possible something could go wrong. And if something did go wrong, it's possible that it could be material to the financial statements. So because those 3 definitions were met, this becomes a material weakness. What this statement is telling you for financial statement preparation is it's saying it is completely allowable and acceptable by AICPA standards for your auditor to prepare your financial statements. I do not have a single government audit that I do not prepare their financial statements. I just have to make sure I disclose to them that me preparing them does not negate the board or management from their responsibility over those financial statements. Meaning if I were to make an error, you should be catching it because all I should be doing is formatting your information into the right format. So if I would have taken the trial balance that was given to me on day 1 and prepared the financial statements with that trial balance, would it have been materially correct, yes or no? And if the answer to that is no, we have a material weakness, which is what we have. This is not uncommon for townships at all. I see this all the time. But it's a required disclosure for me to make sure you do understand the importance of that disclaimer of they are your audit, they are your financial statements. One thing too I want to point out, I had mentioned back with the budgets that when we upload your report to the state, the system automatically looks at that budget difference, right? And if it's over 10%, it issues a letter. It also looks at management comments and it'll say, do you have any material weaknesses other than financial statement preparation? The state sees this on almost every report they get, so they don't care and they don't want to know about it. So just because you have it saying material weakness, I don't want that to make anyone panic. The state doesn't even want to know about it, but we are still required as auditors to disclose that to you. The way this would come down in severity to being a lower comment would be fewer or non-material journal entries having to be posted. So one thing that we've talked about with the finance team is sitting down at some point between now and next year's audit and going through all the adjusting journal entries that had to be posted to make sure everyone understands them. So that way when they're preparing to close out the books next year, they can hopefully post as many of those as possible. Next slide. So I talked about the material weakness. The next step down is the significant deficiency. And this is saying it's a significant aspect of the financial statements, just like a material weakness. And just like a material weakness, it's reasonably possible something could go wrong. Doesn't mean it did, but it's possible. But if it did happen, it most likely would not be material to the financial statements. So what we have here is with the cash reconciliations, 2 things here we wanted to point out. One, bank reconciliations were being done. We're not saying that they weren't. The problem was with the documentation, we weren't able to verify the timeline of when they were done, and governmental accounting standards do require that bank confirmations are prepared timely. So what we're recommending here, and it's a pretty simple recommendation, is just to be initialing and dating on the bank rec when it's prepared and when it's reviewed, and that way you can support the timeliness. The other piece that we ran into was there was significant old outstanding items, and so we've recommended that those items be gone through by the treasurer, and then you follow the status sheet process as necessary. And I do understand that that's already being done. Next slide. After the material weaknesses and the significant deficiencies, we come to areas where we don't believe that there's something going on. We don't believe there's something wrong, but it's areas where we want to make note or make suggestions. And the first is with the fixed assets and the projects. The bottom line is you guys have a lot of activity going on. I know you know that. You're a very busy board. So we really had a lot of challenges when our job is to take from the board minutes and then go into your projects and be able to support what the board approves to what you spend, to what grants are coming in, and making those connections was very challenging because there was a lot of times where the board would approve something and then something would fall through and it didn't happen and we couldn't follow that through very well. Or there might be multiple transactions related to one project and trying to sort them through in the general ledger. It was a lot of work. So what we're recommending, and we sat down with your finance team on this, is coming up with some sort of documentation method or spreadsheet where you can tie together the board minutes, the expenses, and the grants by project. So that way when the audit comes, you can simply hand the auditor your project listing that says, okay, here were the 15 projects we did. You can hear the board minute dates where they're approved and here are the expenses that go along with them. And that is going to be a huge time saver on the audit end. I think I've done that one. Then the last thing was with board minutes. I know that this last year with the DDA was a lot going on and it was challenging. And the biggest thing we ran into is that we were not able to locate board minutes. We had agendas, we had all kinds of documentation from minutes or from meetings, but we never did find or get our hands on actual board meeting minutes for the DDA. And those are required that you keep them permanently. So we recommend that you keep looking, try to locate them so that you can have them someplace on site permanently. Next slide. So prior year comments, I can't speak at great length to the prior year comments because they were not my comments, but what I can tell you is I did have my staff go through each of the comments from the prior year to ensure that the situation that was being recommended was either corrected, progress was made, or where did we stand with it. And it's really exciting if you look through that listing, all but 2 say corrected. One of them says progress made, and I gotta say, your finance team worked really hard on that one. Unfortunately, you just had, I believe, 2 people trying to correct the same issue, which duplicated some entries. That's why I had to say progress made instead of corrected. And then the financial statement preparation controls. I really think that comment is going to be there for many years. I would just like to see us work towards getting it down the scale where maybe in 2 years from now, it's not a material weakness, but it's only a significant deficiency. Questions for me? There's my contact information. My email does come through on my phone. I travel a lot, so my cell phone is definitely the best way to get a hold of me. If you shoot me an email, I'll reply to you, and my cell phone shows up right in that. So,
Cindy, this is Jim Byer. I have a question about the letter from the state that's having a concern, and they have given us, this is a letter that you said was kind of routine.
yes.
You had a clarification after. But anyway, they said that we would like to see this corrected in 30 days. 30 days starting when?
I'd have to read the letter to know that answer. I would assume it's probably 30 days from the date of the letter. But with something like that, with the budget overage, that's not something that you can correct until the next audit comes out, because the finding was the fact that your final numbers were more than 5% over your actual balances. So they're not going to be able to see that it was corrected until next year, but simply replying to them in the format that Dave had, I know he's put together, is sufficient for them. I do see these letters come out quite often, and I've never had the state argue with the response of saying, hey, this is what happened, but we understand why it happened and it won't happen again.
Okay. The letter from the state was dated May 18th, and this is the first that I think the whole board has heard of this. At least that's the case with me. So are we saying 30 days from May 18th, which leaves us 10 days to respond?
Well, I know that Dave has put, I think that'd probably be the safe assumption. And I know Dave has put together the response. So if the board approves that response tonight and Dave mails that, then I think you're fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I'd just like to make one comment. This is Martin. I've listened to quite a few of these annual audit reports, and I'm here to say that this is the first time, thank you, Ms. Scott, that we got this information to this caliber. I understand an audit a lot better tonight than I have in the past, and I listened to a lot of them. I thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. I try to give as much information without boring you, because I know that audits can be really boring to some people. So, and to that same regard, again, like I've said before, if I didn't cover something that you really wanted more information on, please email me, call me. I want to make sure that you feel like all of your questions have been answered.
Hi, Cynthia. This is Tim Cummings. I had a couple questions for you. The first one was actually a comment or question related to what you had said on the last page of your presentation before we moved on to your business card. You had mentioned that next year you were hoping that the financial statement preparation controls wasn't going to be as big an issue. Can you kind of go into a little bit more information about that? Because for years, our audit response from our officials has been that we've evaluated the cost versus benefit of establishing those internal controls over the preparation of the financial statements and determined it was best interest of the township to outsource this to its external auditors. So where are you expecting this to change next year?
Yep, no, fair question. And I can definitely understand how that would be a little confusing. And I have definitely used that language on my audit reports too. So I'm not downplaying or saying anything about that language of saying we've evaluated the risk and we're accepting that risk. That is very standard language for this disclosure. And if you were to have like a single audit, that's probably the exact same language I would use for the federal government because it meets all of their standards. What I'm referring to is that I would rather see that still be a comment because you're having us prepare the financial statements, but I'd like to see us get to the point where there's less audit adjustments that are required, because if we can get the number of adjustments down, continuing to get them down to where they're not materially changing the bottom line numbers, then we can say, you know what, this isn't a material weakness anymore, it's just a significant deficiency. We can decrease the severity of that comment. I don't foresee that comment going away, but I would like just to see the progress made of being able to have less entries, less of a fluctuation, because at the end of the day, here's what you want to think about. When you're making your decisions, if your audit is done, oh goodness, in March, we did it in March this year. So we're auditing December year-end numbers. So in January and February and March, I don't think you got a final trial balance from us until April. So for those first 3.5 months of the year, all of your decisions were based on what you believed the December balances to be. There were significant changes during the audit. So for 3.5 months, that information wasn't quite what it was supposed to be. And please don't misunderstand me. This is so common in every single township that I deal with, in cities and in counties. This is a very, very common thing. But the more you can work towards having less adjustments and less changes, the more accurate your information is in that interim period between the end of the year and the audit. So I just want to see less of a fluctuation. Does that help?
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Yes, it does very much. And yes, we've discussed this topic for the last few years, so thank you. So the next question that I had for you had to do with the reconciliation report. It was a comment that you made on page 29 of your slide deck. It's on page 75 in the audit report. And it was when you made the statement that the timeliness of the preparation of reconciliations, and you couldn't determine it. It couldn't be verified. And I wanted to ask a few questions around that point, because I think you made it a point to call all the board members some months ago. I remember that when you called me at home and we had the conversation, you were asking, is there any particular, concern that, that I had? And I said, well, the one thing I'd be interested to know is reconciliations. When are they being done? Are they being done in a timely manner? You mentioned that you weren't as familiar with BS&A as maybe others might be, and you weren't familiar with whether or not what the mechanism would be for you to determine what those dates were. On that call, you mentioned to me that you were going to reach out to some power users in other townships or municipalities who might be able to give you some advice. And it sounds like that didn't happen, since this was the statement you made in our report. Can you explain?
I think what I did was I delegated the testing of the cash reconciliations with your specific concerns to one of my power users of the software to try to get in to see what we could verify. And we weren't comfortable with what we were able to find to be able to say, yes, they're being done timely. We just couldn't find enough to support it. And so I thought safer approach, because I in no way want to insinuate that they weren't timely when I can't support that. But given the concerns that were brought to me about timeliness, I also didn't feel comfortable being able to say, stamp my approval to say, yes, I'm comfortable with this. At the end of the day, I wasn't comfortable enough to go either direction definitively. So I felt like this was the safer approach to say, you know what, let's just initial and date them, and that way we're covered. And just so you know, this is not one that would go to the state as far as them sending a letter back. So when we issue the report to the state, they have specific findings they ask about. This is not one. So this is more disclosure and information for you. It's not something that I reported to the state.
That's very interesting. Okay. Huh. All right. Well, so you're saying there's no reconciliation report that you were able to use or find?
There were reconciliation reports, but if I recall correctly, the dates that print on them are the dates that they're printed, not the dates that they're prepared. So I wasn't able to know what date they were prepared.
All right. I had one more question here, and it has to do with something that we didn't really cover in this report. But I understand that Stevenson does audits for Oscoda Township and the Senior Center as well. Is that correct?
Oscoda Township for sure. I'm trying to recall. Yes, the Senior Center as well.
Yeah, the Senior Center that resides in Oscoda Township that we own a vast majority of. And I was just wondering if during your audit, did it come to your attention that that the Senior Center was new to our list of assets?
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I.
It appears that in the past, I guess, we never depreciated the Senior Center in the 40 years that we've actually owned it. So which means it's been somehow missed repeatedly by many people for quite a long time. And I was just wondering if this was brought up, what was discovered by you, or did you find anything more about this, or what were your thoughts on this topic?
I don't recall that as being something in the current year. I'm pretty confident.
Hmm.
I mean, I'd have to pull up the work papers. You have a lot of assets, so I don't want to speak and be incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
But to my understanding, it's in there. And again, this was my first year doing Oscoda Township's audit, so I can't speak for previous years. I have all the faith in Jamie Crothers. She's a great auditor.
Yeah.
But I really don't think I can speak to that, but I have to believe that it's in your listing of fixed assets.
Interesting. Yeah. I think there was a point that came up where it wasn't on our insurance all this time until this year, but okay, fair enough. All right.
Well,
I was just wondering if you had.
The insurance would be completely different from the fixed asset
Of
listing.
course, yeah. But if it's something that you hadn't been, that we hadn't been depreciating for some years.
I absolutely believe you have. I was not on the Southwell Township's audit in the current year. I have been in previous years, and I know the understanding was always the split between Oscoda Township and Southwell Township.
Okay, that's good.
But I will confirm that, Tim. I will absolutely confirm that it's on the listing and that it's been on the listing, because I'm pretty confident that that's the case.
Very good. All right, thank you for your help.
Would you like me to just call you with that?
Well, that's fine. You can even drop me an email too. It's all good. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate
I will get back with you on that as soon as the meeting's over.
it. Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions? I would like to note that any discrepancies pertaining to the duties of the superintendent have been fixed. So within Mr. Schaefer's first year, he had ensured that there were no discrepancies that fell under anything under his purview. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Schaefer. All right. Thank you, Ms. Scott. I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Then the next we have is our consent agenda. Are there any comments regarding the minutes for May 26th? Any comments regarding the payment of bills for $80,820.21? Is there a motion for the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion we approve the consent agenda.
This is Bill. I did have one question, quick question on the fund summary report through May 20. On May 7th, there were 3 checks written and are shown to the Fund 248. I was under the impression that we had closed that count effective the end of December. I'm just wondering why here in May we're still writing those checks to that fund.
So we're, I think later on in the agenda, we're working to appropriate some money in 101-250 for those kind of expenses. So until we have budgeted expenses in 101-250 to expense against, Fund 240 is the only place that has appropriations for those expenses. That's my understanding. So we're in the process of transferring, but the budget isn't such right now that we can code those against the 101-250. Hopefully after tonight that won't be an issue anymore.
I was under the impression 248 had been closed. We've always had a fund 250 fund.
Yeah, but there's nothing budgeted into the 101-250 for utilities. We can't budget, we can't expend something against a $0 budget. And exceed that budgeted line.
Okay, but I don't know how we write checks to a fund that doesn't exist.
No, so the fund was closed retroactively. So I mean, up until I think we acted on it sometime in April. So it didn't close in 2019. It's existed into 2020. The board took action to retroactively close it as part of the audit process and the financial year-end wrap-up. But
In
the
April.
fund still exists. Yep, correct. Fund still exists until we can empty it of money and funds, and we can't do that until we have a place for those funds in the general fund. So again, it's in process, and hopefully after tonight's appropriations that make way for expenditures, those specific expenditures, then this will be this issue will be over.
Okay.
I did want to bring to the board's attention it's on 154 of the packet, and it is the report for 2021 operating revenue. And within that, you'll see it's a memo from the assessor's office. And what she is showing is the based on the estimate of 2020 millage rates. And so we will go into that discussion on June 24th at our work session from 2 to 4. But as Cindy mentioned before, property taxes are the largest source of revenue for the township, and that kind of gives you an overview of where that's going. And so obviously the narrative at the bottom, I'm not going to read it for you, but the property taxes are projected to increase slightly from the 2019 to the 2020 millage rates. And you'll see at the top there, the 2019 taxable value, just under 305 million, which is higher than approximately 298 million from the prior year. So I just wanted to bring the board's attention to that. We will be talking about that more on June 24th.
All right, is there support for the motion?
Yes, I would support that. Jim?
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call?
Mr. Gajewski.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Cummings.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Subcommittee reports and project updates. First is the Michigan Safe Start Plan.
All right, so what you'll understand is the Michigan Safe Start Plan. This outlines high level the different stages. As far as what stage are we in right now? We have been moved to stage 4, which is improving. So we have stage 5 and stage 6 to go. Stage 5 is containing, and stage 6 is post-pandemic. And so basically stage 6, meaning post-pandemic, all businesses would be open. Events and gatherings of all sizes with new safety guidance and procedures would be allowed, as well as social distancing rules are relaxed and large events are permitted. So it kind of goes into the next order. And what I have to do at this point is really just put together, it says recap of the executive orders issued by the governor, because I don't know when these are coming out, and they come out frequently. And so since we met last, at the end of May, there's been some game changers as far as if you read executive order 2020-110, and then most recently executive order 2020-115. And so in there, it talks about different regions moving to different stages. And there is a plan and more specificity as far as the stages and what that means for the regions with actual dates. And so I've sent those executive orders. You can read through there, but that kind of bleeds into the next project update is the recommendation from the Oscoda Township Board concerning fireworks on the 4th of July. And I was pretty positive that we would have, questions about what's going on. And so the Oscoda Township Board discussed the July fireworks at the regular board meeting on the 1st of June, 2020. In the email from Lisa Sutton to me on Tuesday, June 2nd, it says the consensus is that they feel that it is not prudent to host a large gathering at this time. The Oscoda Township Board of Trustees asked that the Independence Day fireworks not be pursued this year. There is interest if there is an option for a later date, such as Labor Day or postponement until 2021. And so I have, I've spoken to Bruce Tyree with Great Lakes Fireworks. And really, it kind of comes down to three options. And those three options talk about postpone the fireworks to a later date. The example Oscoda uses and gives the example of Labor Day. The Saturday of Labor Day for this year would be September 5th. There is a second option as far as you could postpone until the Independence Day celebration next year. And Great Lakes Fireworks is experiencing this with numerous municipalities. And so we can simply roll the $5,000 deposit to next year, 2021, for the 4th of July. There's a third option as far as going forward with the same plan: post social distancing signs and set the fireworks off anyway on the 4th of July. Now, at this point, we are seeing a rapid change, I guess, as far as these executive orders coming out between May 26th and now. It's just a different tone as far as a plan and specificity as far as moving to the different stages. And so what I am giving this project update for is basically Bruce Tyree understands these three options, and these concepts will be introduced tonight. And then a decision, the board would need to make a decision on the next regularly scheduled board meeting, which is the 22nd of June. And so out of those three options, we're going to have to make a decision. And really that's not giving Great Lakes a whole lot of lead time to prepare, but Bruce Tyree understands how this is a fluid situation with the executive orders and phase 5 and phase 6. I want everybody to understand that as far as the phase 2 water main connections, we are working right now. There are 33 connections, residents, property owners that are very interested in hooking up. This is a combination of row, working with the different residents and understanding who wants to hook up. And based on this, if you go back to phase 1, there were a total of 24 potential connections for phase 1. There are potential 132 connections for phase 2. Right now, Row has identified 33 homeowners that are interested in hooking up. And what does that mean? And so basically, with that number of known potential hookups, Row and what you have in your packet there is a sample for what was done on phase 1 as far as the water service installation. And what it includes is a base bid. And so that base bid goes through a 100-foot connection with kind of the standard water hookup from 100 feet from the curb stop box into the interior plumbing. And last year, that came in at that base bid of 100 feet came in at $4,400. And so what Rowe is going to be doing is working to communicate with the homeowners as phase 2 is wrapping up to be able to help advertise and get plumbing contractors interested in performing those hookup services. And obviously there is an economies of scale to be able to have 33 known right now with more potential hookups that of people that want to hook up right away. And so they will be working through that communication. You'll be seeing that communication so that you understand what's going on to help these homeowners hook up to phase 2. My last project update there is basically just the reminder of the work session that was established for Wednesday, June 24th, 2 to 4 p.m. at the library. And right now we do have Tom Traciak and his associate Matt Felpash will be attending to go over the water rate study. And we will be talking about that as far as and some revenues that are revenue projections for 2021. So before we dive deep into all of the expenditures associated with 2021, we first have to have a baseline for the revenues that are projected to be coming in for 2021. And those are all my project updates.
Does anybody else have anything?
Yes, I had a question. I know about the sign ordinance. I know that the Planning Commission subcommittee has been working on the sign ordinance for some time. I was wondering when the board might expect to see something or be presented with something with a revised ordinance to consider for approval.
Yeah, John, this is Bill. I can speak to that. We, if it hadn't been for, Rona coming into the scene here, we probably would have had our new sign ordinance either out and presented to the township board by now or very close. We had been working on that quite diligently for quite some time, and we were just beginning to get into the we have all the definitions and all of that preliminary stuff for the new sign ordinance, and we're just getting into the meat of the ordinance and the changes that have to be made to conform with the after the Supreme Court decision on signs. So as soon as we can, but unfortunately our subcommittee, we really have to meet in person. It's not the kind of a committee that you can be effective doing via teleconference or Zoom. You really need to sit down with one another at the table and go over the documents together. And so as soon as we are able to meet, we will be getting our subcommittee back in action, and I would expect that we will have a new sign ordinance. I don't want to give you a time because I just don't know. There's a lot to go over because we have to completely redo the sign ordinance, and like I said, we've made a lot of strides in getting through it, and we're just getting to the meat of it, but it'll take a little time, but unfortunately we haven't been able to meet yet. So as soon as we're able to start meeting in person, we will be getting on that, and hopefully within a month or two we'll be able to have something presented to the board. Well, to the Planning Commission first, and then of course to the board.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know
Sure.
I know it's a lot of work rewriting something like that, and I know there's a lot of different ordinances to tackle, which to prioritize first. So I'm glad that the sign ordinance is underway, because from what I understand, the condition that it's in doesn't seem like an ordinance we should have on the books. So I'm glad and look forward to getting that updated as soon as possible. Thank you.
Right. My understanding is that all the MTA and MML and all the agencies, their legal departments have been advising townships to review their sign ordinances and not expect to enforce their existing sign ordinances based on you know, and they've been saying that for quite some time based on the Supreme Court decision of a couple of years ago. So we undertook that project. We knew it would be a big project. But like I said, if it hadn't been for Rona coming into the scene here, we probably could have pretty much had it completed by now. But unfortunately, you take away a couple of months worth of work that we could have done that we weren't able to. So it's, you know, it slowed us down. But we will be getting back on that very soon, and we'll have something to present to the Planning Commission here before too long, and then that'll, you know, come back to the Township Board.
That's good. Yeah, and I've gotten some questions lately about it, and what I've understood is it seems like it's been unenforceable for a number of years, up to 4 or so at least. And again, I'm excited that it's underway, because getting an ordinance off the township's books, you know, unwritten from, I don't believe we the township should have a law that we don't intend to or can't, even if we intend to enforce. So the quicker we can remedy that, the better in my mind. So I appreciate it.
Sure.
Anybody have anything else?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts regarding fireworks. This is Jim. Just thoughts. I'm amazed that we have until the 22nd of June to make the final decision. Our vendor is very understanding in letting us wait that long, if I understand that. My thoughts are, if Oscoda has said by consensus their work that they do not want or would rather not have fireworks, does that mean if we go the other direction, they would not contribute to the fireworks? Because, Dave, maybe you can tell me, Aaron, I forget, don't they pay a third or a quarter of the price of fireworks?
Yes.
You don't have to.
We've asked for clarification from the, you know, we emailed the superintendent directly and said, okay, and posed that question directly. So they met on June 1st, they meet on the 1st and 3rd Monday. And so they'd be in discussion. Next Monday would be the 15th.
Okay, but by then time, we would not yet have made a decision. But I would like to know whether, you know, how strong are they? They don't want, they're recommending no fireworks. Does that mean no money if we decide to have fireworks? Anyway, my second thought, and this is kind of controversial, more so than what I just said. The community to the north of us that usually has a very substantial fireworks show has canceled theirs. The little town of Blenny to the west of us has canceled theirs. I don't know about the community to the south of us. Maybe some of you do know, but I don't. If we should have fireworks, and people are dyed-in-the-wool fireworks watchers, you know, if we could handle it with the right regulations and spacing and all the other regulations that are going with the virus situation now, we might end up with a few more people in Oscoda that would benefit business, gas stations, restaurants, Dairy Queens, ice cream, whatever. If that's important, it would be important to the business community, I know that. But as the oldest fogey on the board, I am very concerned about people's health and mine. So all I'm doing is putting this forward and thinking that, you know, we might be a little island of fireworks. And if the tourist crowd and the tourist industry in Oscoda, motels primarily, really would find a benefit in fireworks if we could handle it correctly, it might be a plus. Something to think about, as long as we have this extra time. So, thank you.
The Tawas Chamber, they're still going forward with their fireworks. They have canceled their parade. Same thing with Harrisville. They have canceled their parade, but they're going forward with their fireworks show.
Oh, they are going forward with the fireworks?
Harrisville.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I was misinformed. So that shoots a couple holes in my second thing to think about. So.
And thanks, Jim. Actually, I get where you're going. So I would just want to add that the June 22nd date is something driven by the governor's executive orders, and it is fortunate that the vendor who provides our fireworks is willing to wait so long to hear our decision and to hear the governor's decision, for that matter. I think in my mind, I'm kind of just waiting for the governor's decision. I feel like it's, to be quite honest, I would not want to cancel it if it was something we could do and the governor permitted it. I think it'd be a really wrong thing to do. But if the governor says that we can't and shouldn't, then I think our hands are tied at that point.
Yep. And not only is the vendor giving us a surprising amount of time to make our decision, but as I understand it, the Great Lakes Fireworks has said, you know, if it turns out that you can't do it or you don't want to, I can take care of you on Labor Day, or I'd be willing to transfer your deposit till, you know, July 4th, 2021. I think we have a lot of pretty good options there. But anyway, in proposing that as even something to think about, I was thinking, as I said, we might be a little island of fireworks in Northeast Michigan, but apparently I'm wrong. If Harrisville's going to go ahead and Tawas might or is, but I still wonder if we decide to go ahead, would our sister township contribute money, or we be responsible for 100% of the cost?
And I agree with everything that Mr. Byer and Mr. Cummings just said. And I would say if we have to, I want to give ourselves every opportunity to have the fireworks show, similar to the sentiments expressed. And if we leave ourselves that opportunity and are able to go forward, but are without the contribution of our neighboring township, I know there's been a history within the community of fundraising for the fireworks. The Friends of the Fireworks, I believe they're referenced as. If this is something that the community wants to continue to see, and we're going to have a deficit of funding, it's just something that again, wondering ideas is the community wanting to see fireworks this year, and is that something that the community would feel passionate about, and something the Friends of the Fireworks might, retake up that initiative. Just wondering aloud.
All right, then let's move on to the 2019 Corrective Action Plan for the Department of Treasury.
So your packet contains a letter dated the 18th of May, 2020 from the Department of Treasury concerning the request for improvement of deficiencies corrective action plan. The packet also contains a string of emails dated the 18th of May, 2020 from the audit team detailing why this deficiency was triggered by the Department of Treasury. Board members will note that the accounting for capital assets due to the dissolution of the DDA back in April of 2019 is an isolated incident for the township's 2019 financial statements. Board members will also note that Resolution 2020-07, Township Funds for 2019 Annual Financial Statements, passed at the 13th of April 2020 board meeting, retroactively closed both the DDA Fund 248 and the DDA Operating Fund 252 back to the 31st of December 2019. The next action item will help address booking back the 2020 revenues and expenditures back to the General Fund 101-250 Lakefront District Cost Center. Packet contains a proposed draft letter required to be sent to the Department of Treasury explaining this deficiency for the 2019 financial statements. This requires Township Board approval.
Any comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the 2019 corrective action plan to be submitted to the Department of Treasury as presented.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. 2020 appropriations for Fund 101250.
So this request comes to the board members in conjunction with the presentation, the 2019 audit report, as well as the previous action item discussed. Board members will note the BS&A revenue and expenditures report as supporting documentation provided for the fund summary report in the finance section of the consent agenda for this meeting. Board members should specifically note the revenues and expenditures associated with the DDA Fund 248, which is $17.28 for revenues and $8,393.81 for expenditures. The DDA Operating Fund of 252, which was $26.74 for revenue and $218.30 for expenditures. Due to the closure of both funds retroactively back to the 31st of December 2019, all revenues and expenditures need to be booked back to the General Fund 101. Based on discussions with the treasurer and the clerk, the recommendation is to book all revenues and expenditures from DDA Fund 248 and DDA Operating Fund 252 back to the General Fund 101, 250 Lakefront District Cost Center. This requires a request to the Township Board to increase 2020 appropriations for the General Fund 101, 250 Lakefront District from $17,600 up to $35,500.01. The increase, $17,900.01, is comprised of $16,250.01 from the DDA Fund 248 and $1,615 from DDA Operating Fund 252. This would take total 2020 appropriations for the General Fund 101 from $3,214,198 up to $3,232,099. And this increase in appropriations requires Township Board approval.
Any comments?
Does this take into account the question I posed earlier of the 3 checks that were written May 7th, the total $169.88? Is that factored into these numbers?
Yes, and so what you'll see in the revenue and expenditure reports, those are checks, or I'm sorry, the revenue and expenditure reports was pulled at the end of May, and those checks were written during May. So
Okay.
They should be included within this, because what I pulled to provide these figures had those factored in.
I have a question. I was just wondering, given what the question Bill asked earlier, we decided that we were going to close out the account. Was it this? I believe it was this year, was it not? Is that what you said, John, when you answered? I think you said in April, but I don't know whether you meant this April, a couple months ago, or April 2019.
Sure, yeah, yes, I can understand. No, we, the Township Board, voted by resolution to close Fund 248 and 252 retroactively back to December 31st of 2019.
Right, and that was in April of this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, all right, and then we get around to finally closing this out. I see. All right, great. Thank you.
Yes, and Mr. Schaefer's initiative to close some funds I'm looking forward to it, and this is 2 funds that go into that. So I'm looking forward to having these closed as much as anybody.
Yeah.
All right, is there a motion?
Make a motion to increase the 2020 general fund appropriations to the Lakefront District by $17,901 and to book all revenues and expenditures from Fund 248 and 252 to the Lakefront District Fund.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. Workers' compensation insurance renewal.
All right, so the packet contains an email from the clerk dated the 28th of May, 2020. This email was sent with 5 attached PDFs that are also included in your packet. Board members will note that the total for 12 months of the workers' compensation insurance renewal is $16,304, and that's 4 quarterly payments of $4,076. Board members will also note that the policy premium runs the 1st of July 2020 through the 1st of July 2021. For comparison purposes, the previous two 12-month premiums were $21,644 and $23,184. So you see a downward trend there, and this renewal requires Township Board approval.
Comments? Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the workers' compensation insurance renewal for $16,304.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed,
Yes,
motion's passed. Easy Go utility carts.
Your packet contains a memo from the Parks and Recreation Director dated the 29th of May concerning the utility poles at Old Orchard Park. Board members will note that the Old Orchard Park CIP Fund 218, line 218,000,984.000 for CIP expense at $15,000 budgeted for 2020, and the recommended proposal of $12,700 for 2 utility carts came in substantially under that amount. This purchase requires Township Board approval.
Comments?
Yeah, Dave, is Al going to be online or not?
Haven't seen them.
I don't see 'em.
Okay, maybe you can answer this. I don't know. These carts, are they air cooled or liquid cooled?
I don't know.
Are they 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drives?
They're 2-wheel drive, I believe.
I only seen one breakdown of equipment, and that was from, what was it, Cub Cadet or something like that? And that was a battery-operated one. And again, some of those carts, you got to have hard surface tires. If you do not have if you have a turf tire on that vehicle and you drive on them paved roads out there, the tires will go flat. They'll come right off the rims. I hope this was all taken into consideration when he put this out for bid.
So if you see the page 201 of the packet and 202 goes into the specifications in the utility carts, you'll see it's a 16.4 cubic foot dump box with a 1,000-pound capacity. Headlights, front brush guard, mounts for future work lights added, and covered poly rooftop with a 400 cubic Kawasaki engine.
Correct. But doesn't say anything about the 3 questions I asked.
Well, I don't think Kawasaki engine, the size, is battery operated.
I know that. I'm not
Okay.
stating that.
Okay. What was
I
your,
just
what
want
were
to
your
know
3
if
questions
it's
again?
air-cooled or liquid-cooled.
Oh, I see. Got it. I'm tracking.
And if it's 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive.
Looking on page 205 here of the packet. Powertrain. AC controller dash mounted. Air cooled.
Air-cooled?
Air cooled.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't see that. I just seen the
Page
powertrain
205.
and that, but I overlooked that,
Yeah.
which makes it a lot easier because we don't have to maintain antifreeze in them things all winter long.
And to your question about the tires, there's something here about a 20 by 8-10 6-ply rated tire, front and rear.
Correct.
And
But it doesn't say if it's a turf tire or a
Right.
knobby tire, which
Right.
can be used for hard surface roads.
Right.
so the car, I just got a text from Al. He said the carts were built on the specifications for the ones they have now. So I know you've seen the carts out there, Marty. They're in pretty pitiful shape. So this is to upgrade those based on what we currently have.
Okay. That's what I was looking for. See if we're going to be covered with it. That's awful cheap price. That's why I'm concerned with it.
Mm.
But the ones they have out there, they're doing the job. So if these going to be taking their place and it's cart for cart, I have no problem with it then.
Okay.
I have a question that probably isn't as important as Martin's about air cooled or the type of tires and will they stay inflated and so forth. But are these additions to the EasyGo fleet out there, or are we going to sell a couple after we get the new ones?
No, these are additions, but keeping the current ones going has been a challenge. So you'll see later on in the CIP, a couple of years later, there's also more for these carts. These are kind of the workhorse of the park to be able to go site to site and pick up the trash.
Right.
I'd like to comment on that a little bit because I talked with Al on this 2 or 3 years ago about getting more EasyGo carts out there and eliminating the vehicles, the trucks, the pickup trucks and the cars that's really costly to operate out there where these carts are really economical.
Yeah.
So we got it on the capital improvement plan for, a couple of years down the road to acquire these.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of 2 EasyGo carts in the amount of $12,700.
Support.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Gajewski. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Partial payment for Phase 2 of the water main extension.
All right, so your packet contains a string of emails from Roe concerning the partial payment for phase 2 of the water main extension, as well as a signed application for payment number 2 totaling $552,150.18. If this payment were approved, that would leave $507,000 $123.15, remaining on phase 2 of the project total of $1,379,416.95. Team Elmers has nearly all of the main line in and still working on the bore under the railroad in connection at Cedar Lake Road. Once the work is complete, the line will be pressurized and chlorinated for bacteria. With those tests passing, restoration will get started for the entire project. Team Elmers still feels the project can be wrapped up the week of the 15th of June, next week, or the week after, which is the week of June 22nd at the latest. Rowe will be coordinating the final inspection with USDA Rural Development personnel as Team Elmers has wrapped up this project.
Comments?
Well done.
Yes. You're doing an excellent job.
All right, I move that, I was going to say another comment. Go ahead.
Schedule?
Can you say it again, Mr. Gajewski?
The way they're moving along out there in phase 2, do we look at this being ahead of schedule?
Yeah, they got started early, Marty. So they what we were considered critical infrastructure. So they got started about 2 weeks early. So yeah, this is definitely ahead of the original schedule.
And how are we along that easement? Where's that at?
I'm sorry?
The easement along Woodland Drive.
Oh, so
What's that?
Mr. Eppert meets. They're going to have a phone call with the surveying team from Rowe tomorrow, and they hope to be able to have everything documented to be able to put in the in front of the judge. And at this point, it's basically getting a date nailed down to get in front of the judge.
Okay.
All right, I move that we approve the partial payment for phase 2 of the water main extension.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. Responses to the RFQ for design and construction for engineering services.
Your packet contains a statement of qualifications, or the SOQ, from Rowe for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or the SRF, Planning, Design, and Construction Engineering Services, submitted the 26th of May, 2020. The Township Board authorized the request for qualifications at the Township Board meeting the 11th of May, 2020. Board members will remember that the RFQ is required by Eagle, and Rowe was the only firm to submit a statement of qualifications. Your packet contains the 2020 SRF Planning, Design, and Construction bid tabulation prepared by the clerk. Finally, your packet contains a QBS certification form for the procurement of architectural and engineering services. Board members will note that the public hearings are scheduled for the meeting on the June 22nd, and those will be associated with the SRF, DWRF, or the Drinking Water Revolving Fund, and the ECWAG, which is the Emergency and Imminent Community Water Assistance Grant applications. Moving forward with Rowe and submitting the QBS certification form requires Township Board approval.
Comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve Rowe Professional Services for SRF Engineering Services and authorize the Township Supervisor to execute the QBS certification form.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Resolutions and ordinances. Resolution 2020-11, fees for vacant building registration.
All right, so at the meeting with the Planning Commission, we have been, well, the Planning Commission has been working on the fee, or the vacant building registration, I guess the form, and all of the associated documentation for the vacant building registration rollout. And so your packet contains the vacant building registration form. And this was part of a multi-month discussion with the Planning Commission. Ultimately, resolutions are to establish the fees associated with these ordinances. The Planning Commission felt it to make a recommendation to the Township Board to establish the fees. The first year fee discussed at the Planning Commission meeting was a $25 fee. So you will see in Resolution 2020-11, you will see the vacant building application of $25, or I'm sorry, the vacant building application, that is a blank, and that's a draft. What was discussed was $25, and that was up to the board to discuss.
Comments?
Yes, I $25 is not a line, but my question is this a one-time deal? If you rent your building, which I have some of these commercial buildings, you rent it, and 6 months later they move out, and it's vacant again. Do I have to pay another $25 because it's a vacant building?
No, Marty. What happens is there's a list.
On this before, and I have a hard time with it.
So there's actually a list in the ordinance, and it's listed out A through N as far as the plan. And if the building owner has a plan for the vacant building, then basically the fee at that point does not continue to compound. So there is an initial $25 registration, and once that is registered, basically there is the ordinance outlines all the different ways as far as marketing the property, having it for sale, having a realtor involved with that property. There are many different ways for the property owners to submit a vacant building plan.
But in reference to his question, if the building is vacant and registered, then becomes no longer vacant, it is now occupied, and then it becomes vacant again, does it have to be registered and a fee paid again?
I believe the answer to that would be if it's more than a year. The way this is intended, it is not intended to be a punitive ordinance. We have a fee, and it's doubled each year if the owner doesn't take any sort of action. And like Mr. Schaefer said, there's a whole list of things that people can do, and one of the things we want to do is to be able to help the owners with whatever resources the township can help with through our economic improvement director and other things, grants that may be available and that sort of thing, to try and get these buildings occupied. and or if they need some improvements, some facelifts to do that. So any of these things that owners do relieves them of their obligation to pay. So the way it would work is if the board authorizes this right now, we would go in sort of with a blind eye that we don't know of any vacant buildings right now. So we would, once this goes into effect, we would be 1 year before we would assess any of the buildings and require the payment of the initial fee. And then once that's done, then if the building is occupied, then you're no longer a vacant building. So, and like I said, there's a number of ways which listed in the ordinance of how people can comply with this to avoid that. And the whole point is to try and get the buildings occupied.
I agree with that statement, Bill. Try to get them occupied, but I can see where people are going to list them with real estate companies that they don't want to rent their building. They can list it or put an advertisement in there in the window for rent or lease. But I can see a price going so high that nobody would move in. But yet this is according to the ordinance. This is what bothers me about this whole thing. I don't have a problem with registering for $25. Just that I can see where we're going to run into a real bottleneck down the road on this. That's just my opinion.
So no research or reconnaissance has been done so far about vacant buildings?
Say that again, John?
No research or like survey or reconnaissance have been done regarding vacant buildings by the township?
No, because we haven't had an ordinance that dealt with vacant buildings. So once you institute the ordinance, now you're doing an assessment for your vacant buildings, and they have a year to comply with that.
I mean, we already voted on the ordinance, and we talked about it at length there. I don't need to restate all of that, but I think I'm all for, similar to Mr. Gasky, I'm all for filling these vacant buildings. And we talk about offering help from the township. I think we can provide those services with the economic improvement director and facilitate filling of these buildings without the ordinance. We can still offer those services and assistance. I don't think this is a role that the township should do or is even appropriate for the township to do.
Well, it's been a big complaint in the township for a lot of years about all the vacant buildings, and quite frankly, the planning commission is on those lines, and this is one of the few ways that the township would have to try and get these buildings built, is to have some sort of a fee, which would double each year. And then of course we have to put a maximum annual fee on there so that there's some incentive for the owners to try and comply with some of the regulations of the ordinance to, try and get the buildings in compliance to be sold, or work with the township economic director, or do something. Otherwise, we've had a lot of years where they just sit there. And so this is one attempt to try and change that.
We have a lot of buildings that are sitting empty because the owners don't want to rent them. So putting a fee on them, they're just going to pay that fee and leave it that empty.
Well,
this is what I mean. I have a problem with this going down the road. That's just my opinion and thoughts about it.
So do you think the fee should be more than 25? Because it doubles every year that there's no compliance.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, Bill. I know 3 buildings downtown that somebody owns, and they don't care if they rent them. So they're going to pay $75 1 year, Next year down the road, they're going to pay 150. Next year down the road, they're going to pay 300. So, you know, it's just this whole ordinance does not make sense to me. We're just going to run into a bottleneck down the road. That's just my thought.
What do you mean by bottleneck?
These people are not, they're going to leave them empty, Aaron. They're going to pay for 3 years down the road on 3 buildings. They're going to pay $300. They'll leave it empty again. Then the next year it'll go to 600. But, you know, you're looking at 3, 4, 5 years down the road before you're getting any revenue from these people, or forcing them to try to put a business in there. If they're going to sell them, they would have sold them already.
Well, I think the idea was that if we don't do anything, which has been the case for a number of years, they will just continue to sit empty. So this is at least an attempt to do something. I can't guarantee it'll be successful, but at least it's something.
And to the comment about having the EIC director work to fill them, the problem is if the owner isn't motivated to work with the EIC for filling, then that's not going to be successful.
I agree. And that's one of the points I should have made.
So we've got the public who's putting pressure on the township to do something. Instead of, I mean, really the public should be putting pressure on the property owners to do something, because they're the ones who are responsible for these buildings, but the public's putting pressure on us.
Well, for good reason, because we have a face and a location that's far more accessible than some of the owners.
I have a question. Bill, maybe you can answer this. Last week, we got a resolution for the fees for the watercraft, and it was spelled out what the fees were. I'm wondering why that's left blank. Did the committee have a hard time figuring out what a fine would be?
Well, it's up to the township board to set fees. The planning commission can only make recommendations. And so when, I think that's why when the resolution was written, I didn't write the resolution, but I think that's why it was left blank, so that our board could determine, and the original recommendation, like Mr. Schaefer said, the planning commission suggested $25 perhaps. But that was just a thought, and based on what Mr. Gajewski's saying, he's feeling like maybe it should be more than that, because it's in the resolution, it doubles each year that they don't take any action. And like you said, then if they're only paying, say, $50, that probably isn't a big deal to them. But in 4 or 5 years, when it gets up to several $100s, well, maybe that would be incentive for them then to at least, put a list it with a realtor, or to take some action that would circumvent that fee from there on. And so that's the whole point of the ordinance, is just to try and get some movement by these owners. Now, I certainly understand that, it may not be successful with all of them, but if it has some effect with 1 or 2 of the vacant buildings we have downtown, then I think the ordinance I would call it a success. But that's just my opinion. And I guess it's up to the board to decide what you want that fee. The thought from the planning commission was, we don't really want to make this too punitive of a ordinance, but by the same token, it needs to be enough to, over the course of a couple of years, to where it will get somebody's attention, to where it's actually an amount that might give them cause to take some action.
Right. I guess the biggest thing was the disparity between you guys recommended fees before and now you're not recommending fees.
Well, because this is a little different situation because the fee doubles every year, and we have to come up with a maximum amount that will be. And whereas with the permit for the vehicles, you know, it's pretty easy to recommend what we would recommend for a permit fee for, you know, 30 days or 120 days or a year or a day or whatever. That, I mean, that's a little more straightforward. This is a little more involved, and like I said, one of the suggestions from Planning Commission was $25 to start, but based on the conversations here tonight, it sounds like maybe it should be start out a little more than that, but that's what we need to determine.
Bill, let me ask you a question. What I can
Sure.
remember about the ordinance, how far down the road or can you take them with this ordinance before you file a civil action against them? Or is it possible to give them civil action?
Well, I don't think it would be a civil action. It would be a maximum annual fee, and then it would be billed that fee every year until they took some action.
I can see registering for 25, but after that, especially a year down the road, if they're not doing nothing with it, then, you know, increase it considerably compared to doubling it. But the registration fee, I think that's more than fair. But after that, I think that's...
Another planning board member saying it's a civil infraction.
Right.
That's what I don't want to get into. We start getting civil fractions against these business or property owners downtown, we're gonna, yeah. What to be considered here?
Question, has this whole idea been run by our legal counsel?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And you got a positive response? Yes. No?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
He did not make a recommendation on the amount, as it will.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. No, I think the concept of doing something, like Bill said, in speaking for the Planning Commission, to do something, you know, it may not be perfect, but I'm in favor of, if they're recommending starting with 25, if you double it every year, that's going to go up quite fast. So I am in favor of going ahead with this, as long as it's been checked out legally.
Well, the other amount we have to fill in the blank is for the maximum annual fee.
Mm-hmm.
And my suggestion on that would be $500. But that's...
And then what happens?
Well, then
You
they're
get up
charged
to $500.
then they're charged $500 every year.
I see. Okay. Okay. Sounds reasonable to me.
Based on the conversation that we've had tonight and the comments that Martin has shared, do we really think the starting amount of $25 and the maximum amount of $500 is really going to impinge on this problem and create a solution? Consider that if it's $25 in 1 year, it becomes 50. Second year becomes 100. Then the next third year, it becomes 200. After that, it becomes 400. We're now into 4 years out. Like, so far, I don't see that anything is impinged on me if I was a business owner. I mean, I'm just saying, if I've got a building, I know it's empty already, and I know it's already operating at a loss at that point, paying taxes on it, probably still paying the utilities on it, right? But is that number really enough to actually carry enough weight? You mentioned earlier, Bill, that the amount wasn't meant to be punitive, but actually, I don't believe that that is true. The point is that it is meant to be punitive, but I think that the number that you're starting with, it is clearly not punitive. And it's flying in a stark contradiction to what I think the purpose of this ordinance is that it is intending to be punitive, but we're not putting a number to it that's going to make it punitive. And as far as the maximum amount goes, $500, I'm sorry, I think that's a clear statement again that it is not meant to be punitive at all. All I think we're doing is just doing some bookkeeping here. we're just kind of taking roll call of where where the buildings are in our town that are empty, and that's it. I don't think it's asserting any effort. Excuse me. I don't think it's asserting enough pressure on the building owner to put forth effort to resolve the problem, to try to find somebody to rent it to.
Well,
I'm going to suggest that we table this because I don't think we're at all in agreement with where we are today. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not hearing agreement so far, but I mean, I like the idea, but I don't think that there's been enough work on what this number should be. And I think that from even with Jamie's question, is like, you know, I realized maybe that isn't where the planning board wants to come from and telling us what, you know, to suggest a number or two numbers in this case. But I think there's going to need to be some thought put to this. I don't think that this is the forum for us to be thinking this through for you or the planning commission or whoever. We've
I agree
clearly
with
spent
Tim.
a lot of time on it.
Well, I think I'd be more than happy to, you know, table this till our next meeting so that all the board members can put some thought into this. But that was why, you know, it comes to the board to set these fees. And it really is our responsibility to come up with the numbers we need to plug into these lines. Now, when I say it's not meant to be punitive, what I mean by that is the beginning of getting people to register, because they have to register, and where it becomes a civil infraction is if they don't register at all. So in other words, if a year from now, we contact the owners of vacant buildings that we've determined and notify them that they, you know, have to file this application. There's a fee, whatever we said it's going to be. Then we have a basis to work with those owners to try and make something happen. And that's where I say it's not meant to be punitive, at least not in the beginning. It becomes punitive as the years go on, and there's no response to the township. And of course, as we all know, a lot of these been sitting empty for a lot of years, and there's been nothing done.
Yeah,
so at least
I think we understand that, but I think that Tim is right that we don't have some sort of immediate agreement right now, and the board members need some time to think about the amount. So I make a motion that we postpone Resolution 2020-11.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call.
Mr. Goski,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Resolution 2012.
Can I make a
Go
comment
ahead.
here, Aaron, before we move on to the next topic? I want to make a suggestion, actually. So when this comes back to the board, could you provide 3 examples of your $25 fee schedule and what that's going to look like until it hits your limit of, let's say, 500, And so that could be option A. Option B could be another number starting a little higher. Option C, another number starting wherever you want. Just let's start to see what this is going to look like in year 1, 2, 3, 4, however far it needs to go based on whatever limit you suggest setting. And we can start to see what this would look like. Maybe then we can start to visualize what this could look like and which kind of option we want to go with, or maybe morph a couple options together. I think it would help prepare us for the conversation.
All right.
I have trouble with this 500, and maybe I'm missing something. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer on this, but 25 doubles to 50, 50 doubles to 100, 100 doubles to 200, 200 doubles to 400, 400 doubles to 8. Where do you land at 500?
That would be the maximum. We couldn't get to 8 if we set 500 as the maximum.
Okay. All right. I see. I think I see. Okay.
I understand your point, Bill, or Jim. I get that. Exactly. Yeah, I'd just like to see some proposals. Let's show us something. Then we can try to figure out what that feels like, what it looks like, how does it work, how many years is it going to take for the numbers to double to the point where they finally become numbers that really could be looked at as punitive. $25 is not punitive yet, in my opinion, to the point that Martin was making.
Okay, so resolution 2020-12, application for MDOT TAP grant associated with the Phase 3 bike path.
All right, so when we heard back from MDOT, so they are going to have a selection committee meeting to fund bike path projects with TAP grant funding next Monday, the 15th. And Kathy Samsell contacted us and said, hey, what do you think about the fact that, you know, it might be better if we just do the whole Phase 3 as originally estimated from the school to Old Orchard Park? And what would that look like? And so what this resolution does, it maintains the township's $200,000 amount for project matching funds. Now, what this also does is the funding would not be determined. The selection committee meets next week. After that, okay, there is still going to be opportunity for flat grant, to be able to apply for flat grant. There are other consumers energy grants, and Roe is chasing down other funding opportunities between now and the end of September. However, we want to be able to show the estimated cost for Phase 3 from the school to Old Orchard Park, as far as point A to point B, would be $2,529,900. All right. If you model that and you go to the very end of the it's page 255 of your packet, it shows a model of the school to Old Orchard Park. And again, construction, you see 2,529 in tan in the upper left-hand corner. You then have a total project cost of $2,732,900. And out of there, what you see is the township is going to have to lock in funds, $427,000. And so that is $227,000 more than the $200,000 already locked in. And we are going to need to apply to flat. We're going to need to apply to other consumers energy or other sources that we can chase down to be able to fill that gap if we want to go all the way from the school to Old Orchard Park. However, the selection committee could still, select the shortened version, which would be the school to Foot Site or Foot Village, or they could select this project that goes all the way to Old Orchard Park. And so ultimately they need to hear from the applicant, which is the Iosco County Road Commission. And Bruce Boland has emailed Kathy Samsall for the requirements so that the selection committee can consider both the shortened phase 3 or the full all the way from the school to Old Orchard Park.
Comments?
So, Mr. Schaefer, you and I spoke earlier. This resolution doesn't obligate the township to the additional $227,000 at this point, correct?
It does not.
Okay. We've talked about this project before and its changes and iterations, and I want to bring it to completion. There's been so much work done to it to this point. I'd like to see this phase to completion, but as that price tag goes up, I begin to look at other projects we could be accomplishing within the township with that money. So again, if we can keep it reasonably same cost of the township and get grants or whatever, I want to see this phase through. So that's my question. Where do we, at what point are we going to obligate ourselves for more? And if this isn't the point, we're just signing up saying, yeah, we want to proceed to the selection phase to pick which A or B, I'm okay with that.
I'm confused at what you said.
Okay. Well, I got my answer from Mr. Schaefer. So I'm just saying that I'm okay with seeing this project through as long as it doesn't cost the township more money than we've already committed to it. If we start having to spend more than $200,000, then I'd like to look elsewhere we could work within the township, Parks and Rec system or other projects.
Well, this is Bill. My feeling was that, we've had such a difficult time dealing with MDOT on this TAP grant, and it looked as though we were going to be stuck with, just going from the school to the foot site. And then all of a sudden they come along and make a recommendation to us that we consider the whole project going all the way to Old Orchard Park. And that total phase, it will be a boom for the township to bring people all the way into downtown Oscoda. So I think it warrants some serious attention if it means we have to put a little more money into the pot. If we're able to attain that, I think it would be worth us doing. So that was my thought when because this is the first time MDOT has had a positive word on this whole thing for us. So
I agree. And again, I want to see it reach Old Orchard Park. I guess the essence of my point is, but at what cost? It keeps slowly going up a little bit at a time. And at a certain point, it's not worth it to me. So, but at this point, I'm not there. I just wanted to clarify we weren't taking ourselves there with this.
Do we have to put any more money into the STAP grant so our percentage of matching funds goes up and be more of a guaranteed we get the grant?
So you will see that basically the previously submitted for the shortened version had the match raised at 32%. And you'll see that match raised went down to 29%. So MDOT said, hey, we could put the match down 3 percentage points if we do the whole project. And so that's what that model kind of shows. So it's actually that percentage is going down, Marty.
So we're at 29% now, or do we have to put more revenue to make the 29%, Dave?
The 29, this resolution, all it does is goes through a different project cost. It does not lock us into more than $200,000.
Okay, all right.
And if we don't get the grant, we don't spend the money.
Right. Okay, I understand.
I'll make a motion that we approve resolution number 2020-12 in regard to the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund grant application.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Gajewski. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. We are approaching our 2.5-hour mark. So I need to know if there's a motion to extend the meeting.
I'll make a motion that we
I move-
extend the meeting to finish our agenda.
Support.
All right, motion by Mr. Palmer and support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer, Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Okay, resignation from the Zoning Board of Appeals.
And so unfortunately, we have two resignations from the Zoning Board of Appeals. One, and the first one is from Irene Dunn, and you'll see a letter dated the 21st of April, 2020. And so this is in front of the board for approval.
Comments? Is there a motion?
Yeah, I move that we accept the letter from Mrs. Irene Dunn with regrets, for sure. She's been on a long time, many years of service.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Resignation of Joanne Nink from the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Dated the 3rd of June, 2020. And this requires Township Board approval as well.
Any comments or a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept her resignation with regrets also.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Irene Dunn and Joanne Nink have served very well on the Zoning Board of Appeals. They have been through some very rough meetings, and they have definitely had a significant impact on helping the township. So I appreciate their service to us. ORV Trail Operating Agreement.
Right, so your packet contains my letter, was dated the 9th of April, 2019. And what you'll see in there is the 3 renewal terms. And so what this is the second, running from July 1st of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. And this is the second of 3 renewals. And what you'll see in there, the next page of the packet, page 259, you see the letter dated the 2nd of June, 2020 from Mindy Shermer, the Iosco County Parks and Recreation.
Comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the agreement extension for the period from July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Proposal to post for library assistant.
All right, so what you'll see in there is the plan from Diana, as well as the updated job description for the library assistant. And so what Diana wants to be able to do is advertise in the Oscoda Press on June 17th and give it a month and accept applications through July 15th. And so hopefully we would have a candidate for approval the 27th of July for the second meeting in July in front of the board.
Comments? Is there a motion?
I had just a small comment about one of the words under essential functions and qualifications, ability to work effectively with other employees and general public. Seems like should be the language for the word.
And John, that's something you want in the advertisement?
No, it's just a correction. It's just a really minor correction to the word effective versus effectively. Just
Okay.
typographical.
Okay.
Is there a motion?
Yeah, I move that we allow the librarian to go ahead with her plans to advertise to fill this position.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call.
I have a question.
Okay.
It's not only asking about the permission for the vacancy, it's also asking for like closing early or changing the times and stuff like that. Should that be addressed separately?
You mean adjusting times, work hours? Is that what you mean?
Right. It says they're also asking for extended, like if anybody has to be out for extended time, that they have permission to close at 5 o'clock on Wednesdays and Thursdays because it's a 10-hour day. So it's not just advertising for the vacancy. They want to change the work hours.
Yeah,
Well, I don't want to micromanage. It's her job to organize her employees, I think.
I agree. I think it's two separate issues, actually.
I see.
Well, I think we can let Dave handle the first one and we'll take care of the posting permission here.
Yeah, I agree with that. Handle the posting and library can handle the adjustment in their hours until they have full staff.
I agree with that.
All right, roll call.
Mr. Cummings.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
yes.
Mr. Gajewski.
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Proposal for blue ribbon events.
All right, so this was sent out, this was a placeholder item, and I was able to send out to the board the proposal from Blue Ribbon Events. What you'll see in there are two separate events. One is a fresh air art market, and the proposal is to do that on Furtaw Field on Saturday, July 11th, and Sunday, July 12th. The second portion of that proposal is a Flights on the Beach event on Saturday, the 15th of August, and Sunday, the 16th of August. And so what Ms. Lynch is asking is to be able to go ahead with these proposals. Obviously, we are a little over a month away from mid-July, and so the artists, the traditional shows have been disrupted and canceled and moved about. So this is an attempt to be able to have a kind of two different art shows, one in July and one in August. And obviously, what you'll see in that proposal is that they are a self-contained unit. And so they require basically nothing from the township except the approval for the land usage. But what you'll see in there, they're bringing in all of the perimeter fencing, so it's not like they're going to need us to put up the snow fence. There is also within there, they're bringing their own porta-johns and sanitizing stations, and she goes into detail about the COVID-19 policies and procedures as far as traffic and crowd control logistics. That's all on the Blue Ribbon events. So this proposal requires Township Board approval.
Comments?
Dave, can I ask, is there some monetary reward in this for the Blue Ribbon organization, or is this totally charitable, or what?
So
is there some reward for their involvement?
So right now, they're proposing a fee of $300 for the weekend of July 11th and 12th, to payable to the township. And let's see here, I'm trying to find the other. And then for the second, for the flights on the beach, they are proposing a $500 fee for that event. And what that is that is the Lake Street property.
Oh, okay, now the $500, like in the first example, the 300 went to the township, I believe you said.
Correct.
What about the 500 in August?
That would go to the township as well.
Okay, my question is still out there. The Blue Ribbon organization, is it a total goodwill promotional organization, or do they have some reward? And they should have. I'm not trying to fight that, but I'm trying to figure out, is this just a goodwill organization, or do they stand to profit in any way?
So if you see in the proposal, they are, so Blue Ribbon Events is an LLC.
Okay.
So it is a business, and Blue Ribbon Events, they run these shows all across Michigan, while art shows typically go on in the summer.
I'm still waiting for an answer to my question. How do they get any kind of monetary award? What's the formula? How do they benefit?
I've tried to unmute Todd here. He's like muted himself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So I guess to address this, as Dave says, this is an LLC. They charge their vendors booth fees. Is how they collect their revenue. And then on the backside, they promote these events. So she spends money, as Dave indicated, self-contain these events, bringing in the necessary amenities, and then the promotion of the events. So advertising, media coverage, Facebook, all of the things that she does to promote these events, but they collect their revenue through vendor booth fees.
Okay. All right.
Did
Thank you.
that answer your question, Jim?
Well, who pays? Let's take the first event, the July event.
Okay.
Who is paying the $300? The vendor from Detroit, or who's paying the $300? Who's
Blue
being
Ribbon.
charged the $300?
Maybe we could answer the question better if we know what it is, what point you're trying to get to.
I don't have like I said before, if the Blue Ribbon organization does what they say, they deserve to get a monetary reward. But I'm not trying to uncover some secret plot here. I'm just trying to understand what the proposed vendors are going to be charged. Are they going to be charged twice, a $300? I'm talking about the July event, and then they also have to pay Blue Ribbon an additional deal for a plot. I'm getting a block here on how.
Hang on a second.
Yep.
Danielle is actually in our meeting right now, so go ahead, Danielle.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
So I believe it was Jim that had a question.
Yes.
Okay, so Jim,
Yes.
just to break down an average small event for you, I take on all of the expenses associated with promoting, marketing, anything to get the news of that event and the township that I'm doing it in out to the public. My average cost of a basic show is $4,500 before I'm even batting an eyeball, before I'm paying a land use fee to any of the towns that I work with. That's my basic. So you're looking at approximately $5,000 to $7,000, my basic average cost going into the show out of my own business pocket in venues that I feel that are going to be viable, that are lacking a major art influence of a show. So I'm for profit. I do make money off of this. But the reason why I do this that sets me apart from a lot of other people that are in this business is I'm an artist as well. And we're actually a third generation family right now of people who create jewelry from plants and other botanical elements. So I have a vested interest in this because these are all people that I have known for years that I call friends and associates. And I'm doing it better than all the other promoters are doing it. That's why people want me to do shows in their town. Any other questions?
No, this helps, especially as I understand Art on the Beach, which is the last weekend in June, has been canceled. So no, I think these are things that our community need. I just wanted a little background on the financing. So thank you.
I don't know if I can, I don't see a hand thing. I don't know if I'm being heard here. Usually I can see a little hand in the corner.
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So like I've had meetings with Dave and Todd and we kind of all agree that Oscoda is really missing more presence on that coast as being a huge destination compared to your neighboring cities. And you have beautiful beach amenities and things to brag and rave about that tourists will come and visit. And they shouldn't just be coming for summer. It can carry over into the fall and the winter months with your other events. As of today, you folks don't have very many signature events. So it makes it prime for you because of one, your beachfront brings the customers that support art and eating out every evening and going to breweries and wineries and distilleries and things. That's what they're looking for. So there is a wonderful opportunity to be able to start a partnership where you guys will get a benefit of it. If you look at the Flights on the Beach proposal, there's a component in there that we've discussed about creating a separate grant fund where you guys will have flights of art in your township that will be done every year for you to add to your outside parks or your outside beachfronts or your outside downtown areas, your destinations. So I'm not looking just to come into your township and take all of the money out from the local businesses. I want to instead partner with you guys and help your venue be your area and your township, bring in those people, because then I'll be able to do future events there.
Okay, so as I said earlier, I'm not trying to fight the idea. I'm just trying to understand the financial ramifications of it. That's all. I think it's part of our job is to make sure we understand all parts of the deal. But this town certainly can handle a couple of events. You know, if it works, good for you and good for us.
Okay, any other questions?
Will,
Excuse me.
will Blue Ribbon Events be working with the chamber also? Or just strictly with Todd and Dave?
So they're self-contained, Jamie. They come in, they bring everything, and they have the event, and they clean up and go.
Yeah, they just need an area to rent.
Okay.
Dave, when you talked with Blue Ribbon, you and Todd, does their insurance up to par with what the township requires
Yes.
for an event like this?
Yep, they're prepared for the insurance.
Okay. All right.
Any other comments or a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve the 2 events with the Blue Ribbon Event Company.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Thank you very much, Danielle and Todd. All right. Request to establish joint work session with the TUA, HUSHRA, and Oscoda board.
All right, so we are approaching, it is less than a year until the utility operator that operates the utility for the TUA, HUSHRA, and Oscoda, until that contract comes up for renewal. And so this is in line with a joint work session that happened last time. They want, obviously, the same utility operator performs those functions for HUSHRA, TUA, and Oscoda. And so this is a joint work session to talk about the current operations and F&V performance and next steps as far as the within that time frame of next year for potentially contract renewal or other options. And so this was discussed at the HUSHRA meeting last Tuesday on the 2nd of June. And what they offered is East Tawas in their council chambers offered to host a joint work session Tuesday, the 30th of June at 9 a.m. And so obviously Oscoda Township board members are invited, and I'd like to establish a work session.
Does this time and date work for everybody?
Not for me. It's tax season. It'll be the day before they have to be mailed.
It's all right by me. Wish it was a little later in the day, but it's okay.
It looks okay for me.
I'm not going to be able to make that either.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm not going to be able to make that either.
Okay. Mr. Byer?
I think so. I think so.
Okay, so we should have 3 to 4 board members there. Mr. Gajewski?
Try to make her.
Okay.
I don't know if I can get up that early.
Yeah, amen.
You're up that early.
Exactly.
I make a motion. We have a joint work session with regarding the utility authorities on Tuesday, June 30th, 9 a.m. East Tawas Council Chambers.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Gajewski. Roll call.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. Closure of the DDA bank account.
Right, so it requires board approval, and it has to be noted in the minutes that the township board approves the closure of the DDA bank account, and then that can be given to the bank to make that closure happen.
Comments? Or motion?
I'll make the motion that we close the DDA bank account.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Gajewski, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. All right, we are now into our public comment period. There is a 4-minute time limit. Please introduce yourself when you speak, and for those who are online, please use the raise hand option to let me know that you have comments, or type your items into the chat. For those people on phone, I will unmute you. Does anybody on the phone line have any public comments?
I do. This is Dave Wynn. I'm a resident in Oscoda. I do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask. I think you guys answered the first question earlier, was that it looks like phase 2 water connection, main connection is going to be complete around June 22nd. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. My second question is, in the earlier presentation that was given by the auditor, I noticed that we talked about bank reconciliations, and I'm asking a question. Does the board have procedures in place for doing quarterly or monthly financial reports that are reviewed by the board that have all the pluses and minuses identified when reported?
Yes.
Are you talking financial reports or budget reports?
I'm talking about budget reports. So, I mean, you know, so that you guys know from each account where the money's at and what's reported each month, so that you know with everything's there or not there. Because the bank reconciliations, that means that not all checks have cleared and everything else. Am I correct in saying that?
Do you have any other questions?
No.
All right, thank you. Anybody else on the phone line have comments?
Yeah, this is Greg Schultz.
Okay, sorry, I may have muted you there. I don't know which number is yours. Go ahead.
This is Greg Schultz. I just want to make a comment on vacant ordinance under consideration. As a property owner in multiple Michigan townships, I understand the concerns for unoccupied buildings. I have a property in the city of Saginaw that does have an unoccupied ordinance. That ordinance has gone up to the U.S. District Court of Appeals, 6th Circuit, 2019, and was upheld. Saginaw starts at $150 a year for an unoccupied building. I like the idea of starting at a smaller amount and going to something more than $150. Granted that somebody may have a situation where they've gone into a nursing home and their building is no longer occupied. If the ordinance was only for commercial and rental properties, that would certainly prevent that possibility. So I think it makes sense, and I think the township should go forward with that to at least put a little bit of pressure on people that have buildings that sit empty year after year.
All right, thank you. Okay, anybody online have any comments? Raise hand option. Mr. Tasher, go ahead.
Yes, I got a few things I'd like to ask about. I'd also like to know about the plan for reconciliation of accounts in a timely manner. I still recall the discussion about account number 248 and all the commotion about that during that discussion about what was actually in that account. And that still has got a sore spot with me. I don't understand how we went from $49,000 in that account to $8,000 or whatever it was, and I still don't know about. And speaking of that 249 account, I am really confused. I hear that that account has been closed, but I just also heard that a check has been drawn out of that account, and I don't know. Is that account still open? Are they drawing checks out of there? This is extremely confusing to me. If it's closed, I don't know how we can take checks out of something that's been closed. I also heard that that in the report that the DDA on the audit report I'm referring to, that in April of 2019, money from the DDA had been approved to pay back to those that were charged that should not have been charged. Am I correct in understanding that that has not happened yet? It's been like, what, 14 months, and the people that were charged that shouldn't have been charged haven't gotten a check back from that account, and that would also be coming out of those DDA accounts that are supposed to be closed. So I'm a little confused about that one also. There were several recommendations that were made in the audit under the Appendix 2 financial statement for controls, and who is going to do what, and when are they going to do that to implement these recommendations? Or are we just going to let this sit for another year and go all over this again at next year's audit? Because it seems to me those very things that were talked in there have been continued items for at least the last 3 years that I recall listening to that long audit report. So I would like to see something actually implemented on those recommendations so we don't hear this again. And that's the end of my comments.
All right, thank you. Anybody else online have comments? Use the raise hand option or the chat box. I have one here from Josh Sutton that says, is the township following the Annual Appropriations Act? Are the township financials being reported monthly and balanced like other townships? Okay, are there any other public comments? All right, seeing none, then we are moving on to board comments. Does anybody have anything?
Dave, when we were talking about this work session with the TUA in Oscoda, you made a comment about a work session. Did you want a work session prior to that?
No, the work session was the last time the contract was renewed. I believe it was a 5-year contract, and they follow kind of a similar process. So I guess that would have been in 16 for the 5-year renewal in 21. But no, there haven't been previous joint work sessions like that since the last contract renewal.
So I have some questions. Since this particular audit presentation is, as far as this board is concerned, is really for the benefit of the trustees, because the auditor meets privately with the superintendent, the supervisor, the treasurer, and the clerk some time before this meeting. So I wanted to find out in those meetings, and I guess in any of our internal meetings thereafter, what was the decision about some of these issues? Like, for example, the missing board minutes from the DDA, for example, just for the first one. What was discussed?
So we're still trying to locate those minutes. Again, like she said, we had the agendas, we had packets, but the actual minutes there towards the end, there were 3 different members of the DDA that had been tasked with minutes, and it was very difficult to get those produced and then approved by the board, by the DDA board.
Okay. And then I know that there was progress made on interest, and that's good. There's progress made. I guess when maybe the treasurer or the clerk were both entering these interest payments, it wasn't getting caught. John, I mean, since you do the reconciliations, was this coming up as you were doing the reconciliations?
Yeah, so the comment is regarding certificate of deposit investments. And so those don't have monthly statements to reconcile to. They mature at varying times. Sometimes the terms are at such lengths that they don't even mature within a year. So they aren't reconciled. And I've talked quite a bit based on the last year during the audit. The comment was regarding interest for investment accounts. And the township's response to that would be that the clerk's office would post those entries. So then I spent quite a bit of time discussing, which exactly investment accounts did the auditors, were they specifically talking about, and spent time talking about money market accounts versus certificate of deposit accounts. And so the auditors explained to me that and expressed that the intention was for reconciling the monthly statements of the money market accounts. This comment where they say progress has been made, I can't speak for the auditor. Unfortunately, she's left the meeting at this point when these questions have come up. But I think she would say that money market accounts, the interest was posted appropriately and reconciled monthly. That's my understanding. And from when I read the report and speaking with her, you could ask her specifically that. The progress made, the progress that's left to be done, I guess you could say, would be that when I, at year end, accrue the interest that's been earned over the CDs over the length of the year, when I made those journal entries, so I took over doing those entries around June after the board decided that that would be the township's response to the comment. So when I started doing that from June and I did it at year end, there had already been some entries made at the beginning of the year before I took over. Again, that's where she mentioned 2 people trying to account for that interest. So to answer your question, CDs aren't reconciled monthly in any way, so it wasn't an opportunity to catch it there.
Yeah, I'm tracking that. No, exactly. That makes sense. Yeah, the different accounts, different interest recording. Fair enough. Understood. All right. And I noticed that this year in the report, we no longer have any reference to the need for segregation in duties. So that's an improvement over last year and years prior. So that was good.
Yes, actually, and Ms. Scott referenced it, and it's something I'm quite encouraged by. That, and it kind of answers one of Mr. Tazier's questions. That all prior year comments have actually been corrected or progress has been made, except for only one. Mr. Tazier referenced a few carrying on over a period of 3 years. The only one that's carried on from last year that hasn't been corrected or progress substantially made on that one other was the comment regarding financial statement preparations, which Ms. Scott and Ms. Carruthers before her indicated that those, she doesn't anticipate those going away. Now certainly she discussed they could. She didn't anticipate it. Improvements can be made, and I certainly will do my part to strive to do that. And I think to kind of echo what Mr. Gajewski said, Ms. Scott explained this in a way that is new to me in the time that I sat under audit presentations. She revealed some new things about the way they do things that I can use to set a goal or set a bar to try to attain. But I was quite encouraged by that the number of audit adjustments or the number of prior year comments were resolved almost entirely, that audit adjustments were reduced and were trending downwards for a couple of years in a row now, and that we obviously received an unmodified opinion. So I was encouraged by those things, and they obviously require a collective effort from the township staff and personnel. So I want to take time to give credit and thanks to the work that's been accomplished by the staff and personnel as a whole. So
I had one more comment, and it was that while we've been meeting and this meeting has continued, Cynthia Scott had replied, sent the email that she said she was going to send at the end of her presentation. She addressed the question of the senior center, and she says, and I'll read this as a quote, "I went back through the file and found that in the 2014 audit, it was discovered on both the Oscoda Township side and the Oscoda Township side that the township should be recording their portions of the senior center building, not the senior center directly." So this had to do with, and there's a continued on paragraph here that goes on further, but it was, she had confirmed that this had actually taken place in the past. So I want to just share that with all the folks that are on the call.
And the very last thing I had regarding the audit, kind of, I think to address another question, there was a lot of questions. I'm trying to see which ones I can cover. Bank reconciliations, things were brought up by Mr. Wynn and Mr. Tazier, specifically Mr. Tazier regarding Fund 248, and which is the DDA operating, or the DDA fund. I the auditor said very clearly, and I'd like to say clearly that all accounts were reconciled and to the penny. So I understand the confusion that took place a few months ago regarding what kind of money was in the checking account versus the money that were on the books. It was very confusing. I suppose it's good for the public to see and to get a better understanding, or hopefully, what's going on within the township. But I thought it was a confusing conversation to take place at the board level. I thought some of that we could have provided a better understanding to the public if some of that hadn't taken place at the board level. I think that was a large misunderstanding. But I can assure you that the bank account has reconciled all throughout 2019 to the penny. So.
Well, that is great news for sure. Were they being reconciled monthly or within a reasonable time thereof?
Yes, to my knowledge. So the one thing I would say to that is, again, similar to the interest accounts that were addressed as a comment in the last audit. Around that time, Mr. Schaefer had suggested and asked if it was appropriate to have the clerk's office do bank reconciliations as opposed to the treasurer's office, who had done it previously. And the auditor at that time had said it was acceptable to have either office perform them. So the workload then transitioned to my office, and at the time, I complied with the suggestion. I did express that it was quite a workload shift. So between July and August, trying to catch up with that workload, there was the longest time it took me to process bank reconciliations. But then once I wrapped my arms back around the process from my time as deputy treasurer, then it was certainly monthly. And then I also had two other board comments while I'm at it. I sent out an email to the board. Mr. Richard Miller came to my office this afternoon and requested that I pass a letter along to the board. And then we discussed that I would do that for him, and that mentioning it here at board comment just to make sure the board was aware. He was quite strongly requesting that I make the board aware of that letter. So I just wanted to pass that along. And finally, the state of Michigan took on an initiative to send out absent voter applications to every registered voter in Michigan. So if residents and citizens start seeing those in their mailboxes, those are coming from the state of Michigan, they would be filled out and returned to the clerk's office. And then we get ballots 45 days before the election. That goes for August and November. That's when residents would start receiving ballots back in the mail in response to the proper paperwork that they fill out, return to my office. That again was automatically sent to them by the state of Michigan. That's new and is surprising to some people, or even confusing in some aspects. So I wanted to mention it.
Well, thanks, John. And I do have a question already on that. So does that mean that anybody might have an absentee voter request with your office, that this needs to be refiled with you, or does that stand? Or
so that's a good question, and that's kind of where some of the there's a lot going on right now, unprecedented things. So some people may have filed an absent voter application back for the presidential election, and at that time there was an option to get a ballot for the March 10th presidential primary as well as the November election. So if someone filled out that application, then my office will automatically be mailing a ballot for November. Now at that time, the August election was not an option, so someone would have to fill out an application for that. Over and above all of that, my office maintains a permanent list that we, based on a request from citizens, automatically send these AV applications out to every election cycle. The state did not send those to those people. That's incumbent upon my office to do, and we will be doing that in the next week or so, which is in line with our normal process. So I guess to answer your question, hopefully more succinctly than that, if you already had a standing agreement with my office or request with my office, that will still stand and carry through.
Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, I think you're muted. Oh, okay. Aaron, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. So I've got some comments here regarding the audit. And I was not pleased with our audit comments this year. I was not pleased with them last year. I know that some things have been fixed, but there's several things that have not been fixed, along with us receiving a very high discrepancy rating. So I'm going to show an example here of why I have some serious concerns. There's Resolution 2019-40, which the township passes every year, and that designates the treasurer as the chief fiscal officer of the township. And reconciliations were conducted by the treasurer's office prior to 2019. For years, the township received audit discrepancies related to the lack of separation of duties. A recurring discrepancy pertains to the separation of paying bills and bank reconciliations, with both being accomplished in the treasurer's office. So having all financial operations only within the treasurer's office can cause an internal control environment that is very susceptible to fraud. So in response to the discrepancy of the audit, the treasurer clerk, in discussion with superintendent supervisors we just talked about, had determined the clerk's office will perform bank reconciliations to ensure compliance with the separation of the duties and to comply with the checks and balance system. So these requirements are outlined in Public Act 2, which defines that you have to follow uniform accounting practices. And under those practices is Department of Treasury Accounting Procedures Manual for Local Units of Government. In there is separation of duties. The policy should separate the duties of ordering, processing for payments, and receiving. And then the record-keeping responsibilities, that the treasurer must keep track of the total cash investments allocable to each fund and must reconcile these amounts to each month's bank statements. A listing of all cash investments along with a copy of the bank reconciliations must be provided to the local unit accountant or bookkeeper. It's the clerk if we don't have a bookkeeper, which we don't have a bookkeeper. The accountant or bookkeeper must reconcile the cash and investments recorded in the general ledger to each of the treasurer's reconciliation, or to the bank statements directly. And then under the internal control section, they recommend that separation of duties be considered where possible. For example, collections should be reconciled by an individual not involved in the receiving process. Ideally, the process of cash collection depositing should be performed by an employee who is independent from the general ledger record keeping and bank reconciliation. Reconciliation of the general ledger and supporting ledgers should be performed in a timely manner, an example, within 30 days of month end. So this is a copy of the latest resolution we passed regarding this. Now, 3 issues had occurred in 2020 which caused me to be concerned about the management of township finances. The first one is a bill payment presented to the board on 13 January for 2 payments that were made 6 months earlier. The second is a comment in the 2020 audit report that says during our audit, it was noted that although bank reconciliations were in fact being conducted, the timeliness and preparation and review was unable to be verified due to a lack of documentation by the preparer and viewer. And the third is the number of adjustments that had to be made by the auditor for the 2019 audit, and a significant increase in the dollar amount with those adjustments. So the first 2 I found to be related, and I will go over why I think that those are related. So on issue 1, like I had said before, the 13 January meeting, the treasurer had placed a BS&A check disbursement report in front of the board and said it was to be placed on the consent agenda. There was no further explanation given. This document is shown on the following page. And in that document, it shows 2 bills to be paid from the DDA for Fund 248. One was for $2,100, which is check 1422, and another for utilities of $20 for check 1425. And I was surprised at receiving a bill payment because the $2,100 of that $2,100, because we haven't had any real expenses from the DDA during that time. But the dollar amount also looked familiar to me. So this is that check disbursement, which shows the 2 amounts and the 2 checks. So after the meeting, I started researching what those payments were specifically for. And the $2,100 amount for check 1422 is related to an invoice from Enchanted Blooms dated on the 5th of March of 2019. This expense was approved by the DDA in last March before their dissolution. And the invoice shows it was coded to the DDA account on 18 June 2019 after the DDA dissolution. So this is the invoice for Enchanted Blooms on March 5th for the $2,100, showing that it was check 1422, written on June 18th of 2019 and coded to account 248. So the next page is a copy of the check 1422, and it was written on 18 June. However, this payment was never presented to the board in the payment of bills. The page after that shows check 1425 was written in the amount of $26.36 for DDA utilities and signed by the treasurer. However, again, this check was never presented to the board for approval. This also shows a discrepancy between the check of $26.36 and the 10th January bill pay document of $20.02, which is a difference of $6.34. So my questions were, what happened to the $6.34? Why were both payments coming to the board 6 to 7 months late? When was payment happening, and when was it being journalized in the financial software system? So here is, from the bank, check 1422, signed by 2 DDA officials. And then in July 19th, this is check 1425 for $26.36, signed by the treasurer and clerk. So when the treasurer was asked about these 2 payments at a board meeting on 10 February, the treasurer said those bills were late arrivals and then talked about a bill from September, which was not on the bill pay document. I asked a second time and she confirmed. Then Trustee Palmer said that one of the checks was written in June of 2019. Treasurer said it was one of the ones she was speaking to and that we got the bill in December. Trustee Palmer pointed out we got the bill in March. The treasurer then said there was a time period when she did not have the checkbook from the DDA. However, take note of earlier where I mentioned that one of the checks was written by the treasurer, plus all checks are entered into the system by the treasurer's office. The DDA officials never had access to the Township financial software. The treasurer also said during 10 February meeting that the checks were coded to the wrong fund. However, in June of 2019, Mr. Gajewski consulted with the treasurer and superintendent before coding the bill to ensure it was coded correctly. The treasurer also stated that she did not have the DDA account checkbook when mistakes were made. However, the treasurer was given full control of the DDA account by July 2019, as evidenced by the treasurer and clerk's signatures on check 1425. I did find that on 8 January of 2020, the treasurer asked for an invoice from Enchanted Blooms dated 9 September of 2019 because it was never delivered to the township. This invoice was received on 9 January, but why was this invoice not caught in October during the bank reconciliation process? And upon further investigation, I also found the treasurer's office started processing check 1422 on 18 December 2019. As evidenced in an email to the superintendent requesting funds to be moved to compensate for the negative line item. There's another email from the deputy treasurer regarding check 1425, which was written in July, indicating the treasurer's office started to enter the check into the township financial system on 7 January of the next fiscal year. Shown next are the invoice. So this was the invoice that arrived to us late in January, and here is the email showing from 18 December where the processing started for account 248 for the $2,100. And here it is January 7th from the treasurer's office for the $10 to be added to 248 so that it could take care of that $26 check. So up to this point, the documentation shows checks were written and coded in June and July of 2019. But were finally entered into the township financial system in December of 2019 at the earliest. The following BS&A report from the month December 2019 confirms the amounts of $20.02 and $2,130.54 did not appear in the system until December of 2019. Now keep in mind, so far the activity is just for Fund 248. The DDA General Fund Also, the amount of $6.34 still has not yet appeared at this point in my investigation. So here we see this report here that shows the amounts. This is a report of activity into account 248 in the month of December. Attached next are 3 general ledger reports dated 6 June 2019, 20 June 2019, and 3 July 2019 to further demonstrate no payments or deposits were entered into Fund 248. Notice that Fund 248 is missing altogether in all 3 reports. This further proves check 1422 for $2,100 was not entered in a timely manner. So this was before those checks occurred. This was, or that first check occurred. This was the 20th of June, and then 7th of July, or 3rd of July, where count 248 is not anywhere in these. The next BS&A documents show that check 1422 was journalized by the Treasurer's Office on 8 January 2020, the next fiscal year, and backdated to 30 December to the previous fiscal year. So here's the $2,100, check 1422, and then the date journalized was 8 January, and the post date was December 31st. The next one is a journal entry for check 1425 in the amount of $26.36, the full amount of that check. It was entered into the financial software again on 8 January, the same day as the other, and backdated to 31 December. The document shows the 634 that I couldn't find before. It was coded to account 252. So here's check 1425. The amount was the $26.36 up here. The check was split. The payment is split between 2 funds, 248 and 252. Again, with those dates. So why has the amount of $6.34 and 252 not shown up until this point? And the answer to this question lies in the next documents, which shows payments made from Fund 252. But these partial payments were never presented to the board in bill pay reports. A partial payment occurs when DDA bill is paid out of Fund 248 and the other portions paid from Fund 252. It appears that the Treasurer's Office has been neglecting to present the board bill amounts related to Fund 252 for quite some time. And the next document shows those amounts coded to 252 up until December 2019. These were not presented. These are utility ones. These are all 252. So this leads to my second concern, initially outlined at the beginning of this narrative, which is regarding the timeliness of bank reconciliations. Because if bank reconciliations are completed timely, these kinds of financial errors can be caught quickly. So therefore, I checked the 2019 history of reconciliations. So, and that's in these next documents here. So in this document, this is a BS&A report, and this is what concerns me about why our auditor said that when I asked her, can you verify these in BS&A, and she didn't know at the time. But you have here, the created by column shows who the activity was done by. The date of the statement is under the statement date column. And the date created is the date that that reconciliation was started in the BS&A system. And it's the difference between that statement date and that date created that concerns me, as it shows how long reconciliations did not occur after the statement dates. So to calculate these delays, I created a spreadsheet to show the lapse in time. I accounted for a 4-week delay after the statement date due to naturally occurring delays of receiving statements, and that reconciliation may not start the day it is received. And what I determined is many reconciliations were delayed by over 14 weeks. Another note to consider is that many statements were not reconciled for several months, but were then caught up in December 2019 and early January 2020. And this includes those DDA funds where the 2 checks were written back in June and July of 2019. So here's where I took all that data from those BS&A reports and put them in here and graphed out these delays. And some of these accounts hadn't been reconciled for 44 weeks, 45 weeks, 48 weeks. 35 weeks. Giving the benefit of the doubt that 2019 was an off year, I also checked 2015 and 14 reconciliations to see how the treasurer's office was handling reconciliations at that time. And when the clerk was the deputy treasurer, the following reports show that many 2015 and 14 accounts were not reconciled within state requirements. At the board meeting of 27 January, in reference to the DDA accounts, the clerk stated that check accounts were reconciled monthly. So here are those BS&A reports again, and then converted to spreadsheets. And again, we're at 20 weeks, 16 weeks, 33 weeks. These reports clearly show that the treasurer managed the accounts improperly by not entering checks and not following up on bills within a reasonable amount of time, thereby causing the township's financial software system to inaccurately reflect balances and payment history. It also shows the clerk did not perform reconciliations within a reasonable amount of time, much less the state required amount of time. The treasurer and clerk perform two separate duties as part of the check and balance process. This means both offices cannot function properly without each office doing its part. Both offices failed to take action. New negligence was occurring by both parties throughout the year and made no mention of it to the board. And in fact, the timelines presented here show both offices were scrambling during December 2019 and early January 2020 to catch up on their backlog and responsibilities from 2019. Now, my third point concerns the 2019 audit adjustments. And this year's audit shows our auditor had to make 50 adjustments. To put this into context, audit adjustments are corrections the auditor makes in order to fix errors and omissions made by the clerk and treasurer. The auditor only performs a spot check to the township's finances. So this means that 50 mistakes were found, but this may not be all of the mistakes made. And the 2019 audit adjustments totaled $11.8 million in corrections. So even going back in time, over the last 3 years of audits, the treasurer and clerk made $22.1 million in mistakes that were found by the auditor and that the auditor had to correct. So even though number of audit adjustments has gone down, which 50 is still too high, the dollar amount has significantly increased. So this year, the township received the most serious discrepancy a municipality can receive in an audit called material weakness. And in previous years, the discrepancy was under management chose not to implement. I found it a problem that corrective actions in general were not implemented and have not been implemented in quite some time. And the following document, the resolution that designates the treasurer as the chief fiscal officer. So within that document under section 10, the treasurer is to provide quarterly financial reports to the board, which have never been presented to the board. When I'm talking about financial reports, I'm talking about bank amounts. We don't know how much money is in the bank. So within the Township Resolution 2019-40, it states also the chief administrative officer, who is the superintendent, shall present to the board recommendations to prevent expenditures from exceeding available revenues or appropriations for the current fiscal year. How can the chief administrative officer ensure expenditures do not exceed revenue when the treasurer's and clerk's offices do not input the correct data into the township's financial software, especially when we're talking $22.1 million in mistakes? So I find these actions to be serious breach of public trust and gross mismanagement of the taxpayers' dollars. All right, anybody have anything else?
Yes, I do, Jim.
Okay.
Unlike the previous presentation, I'm not running for office, and so this has no political ramifications. My question is simply, I join the statement that was made earlier in the meeting that I thank all the people that were involved in meeting with the auditor and getting us the highest possible recommendation and grade. But my question is, 2 weeks ago, I had a question about the township newsletter that goes with the summer taxes, and there's a pecking order to my concerns. Number one was the first page seemed to be missing a banner title area listing the present members of the board. And the second one was we had a blank page on the other side, and we talked about some valuable information for taxpayers that might be included on that. So I'm just asking, how did that turn out? Did we do that? Anybody respond to that? Dave or anybody?
Yeah, so the current officials and the titles is on the first page, and the second is the clerk provided information, and Tammy was able to put that in the newsletter.
Okay, thank you. Was a copy of that included in the packet for tonight's meeting, or did I just miss it, or the revised version of it?
No, I can send that out. I did not. I can send that out.
I'd like to see a copy at your convenience. It's not, not in the next 5 minutes or anything like that, but anything. Anyway, as I promised, this is not a campaign question or anything like that. I'm not sure a campaign presentation like that would be proper in a meeting like this, but it's over with. So
Campaign presentation?
Yeah. You are running for the treasurer of this township.
Well, let me make this clear.
Yeah, go ahead.
Whether I am or not, this information was going to be presented. So that's irrelevant in this. I don't enjoy doing this. I don't like spending my time on this, but I have a duty because I was elected by the people to be the supervisor of the township. I volunteered for the job, and I'm committed to the job. And so it is my job to report this. It is actually the trustees' job to make sure that the government is doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's actually the trustees who should have been investigating this. So I had to spend time on this that I could have spent on other things of progressing the township. And I know that after this, I'm going to get attacked for this because I know that the good old boys and good old girls groups in this town do not like it when they themselves or their friends get held accountable for things. But still, the evidence is there.
Well, I guess the bottom line is if Cindy Scott missed the boat so bad and didn't pick up any of this valuable research you did, do we have to pay her? I mean, or should we ask for a reduced payment for the Stevenson work? Because that sounds terrible. I mean, she must be terrible at her job, but I don't think so. So anyway, that's all.
Well, maybe you should send a copy of it to Cindy, Aaron. See what she says.
Yep, I can do that.
So for my part, I'd appreciate a copy as well, so I can review, the facts you put forth or the information you've put forth. I'm certainly not prepared to respond to the 51 pages and the presentation you gave currently. But from my point, I'm committed to doing the best job that I can, to continually improving, to admit, to be accountable, as you referenced, to improve. So I'd like a chance to see the document if you would allow me to. I'm discouraged that such serious concerns as you're putting forth didn't come up in the exit interview with the auditor and the treasurer and the clerk and the superintendent, or even tonight when we were discussing this matter on the agenda. All that aside, though, again, I'd like to see the document if I can. I'd like to work with you to improve or to address your concerns, to work together, essentially. So. Work together.
Well, I made it very clear last year after the exit interview that our adjustment should be near zero.
Yep, we've had many conversations to that effect. I know what you're referencing about the dollar figure. It's something, again, I'd like to discuss and to look into the matter with you further in your 51 pages of research there. But the number that we had this year, now again, this is number, not value, as you made the distinction. But the number, which is what we've primarily talked about in the past, was 50, potentially 49, but that's a detail that we could discuss. But even 50 is the second lowest number in the last 10 years, and substantially lower than improvements have been made. again, I'm just looking to improve constantly. I want to be accountable. So again, I'd like to discuss this with you further and get a look at the information you've got there. That's for my part, at least. And obviously there's a distinction of, or the conversation we've had repeatedly about the goal of zero and the reality. You know, I won't deny everyone can always get better, and I always intend to and desire to. The goal, and so as long, I'm working to trend downward, which we're accomplishing. And again, it's a township-wide effort. I don't think now's the time, or am I prepared to address again the document you laid out there. But if we went through adjustment by adjustment, there's you know, we could walk through the reasoning and the rationale behind each one and discuss, you know, ways to improve, which departments are involved, and put in, you know, address it. So again, if you're willing to work on it for the betterment of the township, I am as well. So again, that's just where I'm coming from here in initial reaction to the presentation you made here over the last period of time.
Sounds great. But again, this has been an issue for years. We've talked about it for a while.
So it seems, I agree. It certainly has come up. Day to day, there are not many conversations. Board meetings and specifically these audit presentations, they seem to be the flashpoint for these conversations. So I'm looking for more, you know, day-to-day type of things where we can actually.
That would be great at day-to-day, but when the things don't occur, when corrections don't get made, then I've got to do a report on it, because I need to absolve myself of having knowledge of this. And then if something serious were to happen, hey, I've brought the information out. Corrections were not made. I've done my part. I kind of want to know where, like Mr. Byer, where were you as a trustee in making sure the government's doing what it's supposed to be doing? So that's all I've got on it. I've got evidence on this, and I think it's pretty clear.
Sure. Again, I'd like to discuss the matter, you know, further with you, or in more detail, or you know, cooperatively.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Well, if I could, Aaron, I'd like
Yeah.
to make one short brief comment about this whole situation. And I think for my part, as a trustee, where I had some serious concerns about this entire issue was back in January, when I brought up the point of, we were trying to pay for a trackless snow machine, and we couldn't seem to come up with how much money was in the 248 fund. It was proposed by the treasurer that there was, in fact, she gave a very specific number. I don't remember that exact number, but it was about $49,864, something to that effect. And as it turns out, we were only able to take $8,000 out of that account. So the troubling part to me is that, you know, if at a board meeting and we're trying to figure out how we're going to pay for something and we don't know how much money is in a given fund, I think that's a serious problem. And, you know, as you mentioned, trustees are supposed to be asking those questions, because we don't, as trustees, we don't have access to BS&A. We're not involved in the day-to-day paying of bills and those types of things. So we rely on the people that are involved in that on a day-to-day basis to give us factual information when it comes to a board meeting to make a decision. And that really was what brought all this to my attention and concern, was on that board meeting when we didn't have information on how much money was actually in the account. And there was some disagreement between the treasurer and the clerk. I remember the clerk said, well, he wasn't sure exactly how much, but he thought it was closer to 40 than to 8. And as it turns out, that, you know, wasn't right either. So I'm hoping we can make some improvements here and get it to where, when something's brought to the board and we ask a question, well, how much money is in that account that we have to spend? we can get a straight answer. And that's been a concern of mine for a while now, since that happened.
Bill, are you sure that the treasurer was even in attendance that night you brought that up? Because you and others, but primarily you, have gone after the treasurer, and she wasn't even at the meeting.
You're right. She wasn't there at that meeting. At the meeting that
happened.
At the meeting that came up, I was in attendance. I watched it on the TV, and I brought it up at a later point, and it was Mr. Nordine that said he thought that Ms. McGuire was more accurate than Mr. Schaefer, and if the amount was closer to 40,000 than 8,000, it turns out that wasn't true. That's all I'm saying, is that, you know, we need to have a better feel for how much money we have in any given time in a certain fund. And if they're not being reconciled on a timely basis, then we have no way of knowing how much money is in any given fund at any given time. And that's, to me, as a trustee, that's a problem. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think that going back to the day-to-day sit down in the office on a Tuesday or a Friday and go over this, that Mr. Nordine has suggested and asked for, is a much better way than to what I perceive to be an ambush at a meeting. Come up with a question that you need paperwork and documentation, which you don't bring to meetings, but on a Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning, you could get answers to this if you really wanted them and not just try to embarrass somebody. So, but anyway, I said that before.
Actually, if you look at page 11 of the bound document for the DDA, the ending balance for 2019 is $49,563.82, which does coincide a little bit more of what I said and what John said to be the balance in the DDA checking account, which was the question that Dave Schaefer asked me before the meeting. Now, there's a fundamental difference between what's in the checking account and what's in the fund. Now, if you want to know what's in 248 fund or 252, that's a different story. I would be happy, more than happy, to sit down had I got this information before, or if it was asked on a daily basis. Besides being a campaign pitch, I'll be more than happy to sit down and talk about it and go through it line by line, because I know there's exactly an explanation for everything. We're not the only ones that we input the information that's given to us. Just like you said, the one check was written by Rosemary Netwig. She was the treasurer at the time. Marty Gajewski was approving the bills to be paid. I pay the bills. That's all I do. They get turned in to be paid. When they get turned in to be paid, that means they're ready to be paid. They've been looked over by the department heads, and then they get paid. So if you would please provide me that information, I would love to have a discussion.
Well, the thing is that, like I said before, we've talked about this for a few years about making corrections, and it doesn't look like the significant corrections are being made, especially when there's $11 million in financial mistakes in the journal entries and in the coding. Now, not all bills are coded by everybody else. So the issue is that you guys can sit here and talk about how you want to sit down and work things out and sit around the campfire and be happy. The problem is that when we did that in the past, it's obvious nothing was fixed. And that is why I've now brought it out, because if it's not going to get fixed internally, then something has to be done to fix it externally.
Where have you been for the last year then?
Did you ask for a motion to adjourn, or?
I asked if there was a motion to adjourn.
I hate to prolong this anymore, I really do, but I have to say, while we're on this topic and you know, different things are being said, I still maintain the point Mr. Palmer is making that really was, and Mr. Taser referenced it during public comment, was a source of confusion for many people. Ms. McGuire just tried to address it. I still maintain that that's a misunderstanding, or people are coming at it from two different approaches. Mr. Palmer at one point tonight just said I was at odds with Ms. McGuire, and I don't recall that. Talking about the $40,000 that's in the bank account, I still maintain that that was true at the time. and remains true. I could be mistaken. I'm not infallible, and I apologize if I am. Again, a conversation to that end, not in this setting, which is not the most conducive for hashing things out and coming to an equal understanding, would be good. But I just wanted to clarify that I still maintain that there was a potential misunderstanding there, as opposed, I'm trying to be kind, as opposed to an outright mistake on certain people's parts, or mainly mine. But again, I'm not infallible. I could be wrong, and I don't deny that.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Palmer. We are adjourned.